As I'm trying to go live to my YouTube channel, there was some kind of weird error, and it looks like it's maybe sorted itself out. It has. But I'm here to speak a bit about the void, of course, moon and the translation of light. If you're watching this on YouTube, which is nice because you get, generally speaking, high def charts and other things that I'll share on the screen. And if you can't see all of this live, or if you're later and can't see it all at once, it's nice that it kind of bookmarks your space for you to come back to. It's another place where you can kind of support my work. So if you are watching this in the YouTube space or any of my stuff there, please do like the video and share it around with people like us, starry students. Shauna says she's watching in both places. Well, a guy who names himself Gemini should probably be happy about that. Both places, by the way, for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, are YouTube and a Zoom webinar. So a thing I would ask of you, if you want to be able to join these on Zoom, where you can then be in the chat in the Q&A, and then at the community discussion afterward, please make sure you're on my email list. So if you head to geminibrett.com, let's follow along on the screen here. You'll see, just like if you scroll down just a little bit, there's a join the newsletter. I have a really hard time writing newsletters. I'm not going to spam you. They don't go out that often. I hope to actually be more frequent, but it's a place where I can send Zoom links for free classes like I did yesterday. And I want to say right now, so folks have better warning, I'm going to do the same thing next week. Saturday, Saturn's Day, March 9th, 2023, 9 a.m. Pacific. I haven't really chosen the topic yet. My guess is that it's going to maybe come in either during this stream or on Wednesday, because I've just committed to doing these weekly Wednesday jams. I started this one at 10:55 a.m. on this Wednesday. And in some opinions, the moon is void, of course, which is kind of what stimulated today's transmission, or today's little mini class, which will be followed by some live chart examples and then a community discussion. Again, the community discussion won't be broadcast. It won't be recorded. We want a safe container so we can open up and share our hearts about our natal charts, perhaps, sign of the time, whatever it may be. All right. Anyway, on this day, actually it was more like 10:45. 44 or something like that, because I really wanted to capture my natal ascendant, which is 936 Gemini, like this. And the reason why is I was inspired by Mercury and Saturn, both conjunct Sun on the same day. I also slept in my van the night before so I could get a picture of Venus and Mars together as morning stars, and I just kind of felt inspired to start a thing that I had planned to wait a couple of weeks for. All right, so before I get into this, let me just say one more thing. There is now an events page here at geminibrett.com. I want to thank Carolyn Link for helping me kind of get my S together in that regard, and in many ways. I will be speaking at NORWAC in May, my favorite astrology conference, in Seattle every year, typically at Memorial Day weekend. I have a pre-conference workshop, Raising Vibrations with Harmonic Astrology, using harmonic astrology to add to, not to replace, but to add to your astrology. And then I have 2 lectures, Sacred Geometry for Astrologers, one of my favorite things to teach. And this was a brand new talk for me that I've been wanting to give for years, which is looking at like modern astronomy discoveries about the planets, right? Like Uranus spinning on his side relatively, and how that like really agrees with the astrological expectations or understandings of these planetary energies. It's crazy. I'm really excited about that one, but it is going to require me to get a lot of work together. Anyway, check out these save the dates. If you live here in California, and I just saw on the Zoom chat, many of you attending right now do, like you're here near or in the Bay Area where I live. I'm going to be doing a live and in-person thing. In person, can you believe it? We're allowed to hang out in the same room. And that's with NCGR, the National Council of Geocosmic Research in Sacramento. And it's Sunday, March 24th. As you can see, it's actually the day of the lunar eclipse, the penumbral lunar eclipse. I'm going to be doing a 3-hour eclipse and eclipse series workshops, mostly with live chart examples for people in the room. I believe it will also broadcast over the internet for people who want to join in that way. But I'd say come hang out. If you're nearby, the sky, clouds allowing, is going to be amazing this night. And after the eclipse teaching, we're going to have a potluck dinner, and then I'm going to do a night sky training. This says till 9. I don't know, I might just sleep in the van that night and keep it going. But we, like clouds allowing, we'll get a really good view of evening star Mercury. I'd say we get a really good view of the lunar eclipse. But the truth is not really, because penumbral eclipses just look like full moons. I've never been able to even notice that it's happening. So we'll see that night, we'll try. But there's a lot of things that I'll be able to do and teach and what's going on with the sky, like quadrants, houses, and all sorts of amazing things. And it's always nice to be under the stars together. So if you're nearby, or if you want to drive down or up or over or whatever it is for you, come hang out. So again, Sacramento, Sunday, March 24th. I need to get a link in here to replace registration information coming soon, and I will. But you can also just search like NCGR, not San Francisco. That's the organization that I'm president of, actually. When we do monthly online happenings, and we will actually have our first in-person gathering in June. So you'll hear me talk more about that, or folks who are on my mailing list will be hearing about that as well. But yeah, here's Sacramento area astrologers. So that's the link for me to update my website with. There might be one person on here live who has the power to do so. Please do, if you're hearing that. But you can see you can sign up for it right here. I'm also, let me go back to the events page at GeminiBread.com, which is GeminiBread.com/events. I'm going to do a 2-day eclipse deep dive masterclass. This won't be a free thing, it will be a paid thing. April 6th and 7th, leading into the April 8th total solar eclipse. So if you're free that weekend, I decide not to travel to a total eclipse event, which I'm kind of sad about, but the expense that Anna has our baby in her belly and some of the alignments in our own personal charts, it just felt like a roll of the dice. So I decided instead that I would take the time that eclipse weekend to transmit some of my favorite learnings, discoveries about the most powerful astronomical, and isn't it therefore the most powerful astrological event, which is total solar eclipse. Yeah, and eclipse cycles in series. So I'm really excited to teach that. I haven't gotten that place to register together yet, but I will soon. So just be on my mailing list, again, GeminiBread.com, to do that, so I can notify you when it's ready. All right, cool. So I am now, like, for the first time in my career, committing to regularly scheduled broadcasts. Like, I'm actually going to use, I don't know, not Gregorian calendar, but the magical days of the week. So Wednesday, miércoles, Mercury's day, of course, for transmissions. And it's going to be at 11:11 a.m. Pacific time, because that's cute. And I had planned to launch this thing when I returned from a mystical journey in Washington, D.C. that I've got coming up. So just after the equinox time. And frankly, it was a quote unquote better chart. But as I said before, I was kind of just inspired by Mercury conjunct Sun, Sun conjunct Saturn in the same day. So Mercury and Saturn cazimi in the light, in the throne room, in the heart of the sun on the same day. Like, what are the chances? And because I was born with 936 Gemini on the rise, that triple conjunction of Mercury, Sun, and Saturn were right at the top of my chart. So this isn't the discussion for today, why the midheaven, contrary to, well, ignorant astronomical teachings. I don't mean to be so rude when I say that, but it's just the truth. The midheaven's not above your head. Unless you live in the tropics, and if you do, that's only 2 minutes, 2 moments every day. All right, the midheaven's not above your head. It's not even the highest part of your astrology chart. The highest part of the ecliptic, or the path of the sun, or the heart of the zodiac, above the ground in any given moment in time, is the point that squares the ascendant. And by the way, it's why I work with that point just as much as I work with the midheaven for career assessment, vocation, making a loving, right livelihood as it was taught to me. Um, and so let me just show you my nativity. When I look at my midheaven, I have Aquarius. I'm kind of old school there. I now associate Aquarius mostly with Saturn. There's something about Saturn in the opposite sign that's going to dictate part of like my career, my calling, how I can best offer my energy to the world. My honors, reputations, legacy. The 10th I like to call legend, right? And of course, the 10th house in any quadrant chart, like this Placidus chart that we're looking at, begins with the midheaven, right? Which very importantly separates the eastern sky, which ups, from the western sky, which downs. I mean, it's a crucial astronomical point. It is what is culminating halfway in time between when it rose and when it will set. And when I was born in 75, this is the star Dorsum, which is kind of in the middle of the sea goat, right? So like a very important star for me. But there's a star here at the 10th degree of tropical Pisces in our day and age. This changes with precession. That's called Hydor, and it's a star of the water bearer. And so I also work with that star. I work with this point. And because it's Pisces, I work with Jupiter, right? So let me just say a little bit more about that. The Lord of the midheaven sign in the third. Let me even say that the midheaven is in the ninth whole sign, which is the house of astrology, by the way. It's not only that, it could have been a travel agent. But with the landlord of this realm called Aquarius, Saturn, living opposite, that means that Saturn's in quote unquote detriment. It's also opposition, which is like othership. So I'm often in kind of astrological counsel with others who are in experience of detriment and trying to help them find the structure of their fire is a way I would describe that. Like that's one of the things that I'm called to do, and really fortunate to have found this calling. But I'm also called Pisces, right? So there's hopefully compassion, spirit, mysticism, oneness in that if it's done right. Times in my life it's just been drugs, by the way, not anymore. I'm sober 13 years. But trying to connect to spirit, but so traditionally Jupiter in the 11th, right? And so this is something that stimulates me again and again and again to create community experience for fellow mystics like me. And it's a hard thing to do online, right? All right, I think I'll use my chart as a chart example along the way, because from the modern point of view, I was born with a void of course moon. And from a modern astrology point of view, this first weekly Wednesday transmission for me on February 28th, 2024, 10:56-ish a.m. in Richmond, California, also featured a void of course moon. The moon then had recently trined my own, so maybe that's doing something for me. We even call this partile, same degree, right? I was born with the moon in the 26th degree of tropical Gemini, and the moon at the time for this first weekly Wednesday transmission, 26th degree of tropical Libra, near the great star Spica. But regardless, from the modern point of view, this moon is called void, of course. So I just want to check in with chat really quickly. Let me push this button. How many of you work with void of course moon? Do you follow it? Do you honor that? I'm seeing that Stephen, the Jupiterian here, is asking, is void of course moon the same as out of bounds moon? No, not at all. Totally different things. And I would say like very different astronomy. Actually, void of course moon, it's less astronomical than an out of bounds moon. An out of bounds moon, just to say briefly, and we should do a whole class series on this, especially now because we're in the time of lunar maximums when moon will go most out of bounds every month, and that's in 2024 and 2025, and it won't happen like this again for another 18 and a half years. All right, anyway, so out of bounds means, and let me just show you here, we'll just talk about that really quickly. The bounds of the zodiac, right, are, and I'm talking about the path of the sun, They are the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, which, by the way, are named for the same thing the tropical zodiac is named for. It's Greek tropikos, which means turn around. The ecliptic goes north, it stops and turns around and goes south, right? Or the sun every year, as he follows the ecliptic plane, goes north for 6 months from Capricorn solstice or southstice to Cancer solstice or northstice, stops and turns around. That's what solstice means. Sun stops, turns around, tropicos, and then goes south for 6 months. The moon does this every month. The moon goes through the signs every 27 days, right? But the moon is not tied to the path of the sun. Yeah. Let me just show the midheaven degrees in this moment. So 0 tropical Capricorn was at the Tropic of Capricorn here. 0 tropical Cancer was at the Tropic of Cancer here. But just for that moment, right, the Earth is spinning. And so moments later, 0 tropical Cancer, always on the Tropic of Cancer, would be over here in kind of the western tip of Africa and then into the Atlantic Ocean as the Earth spins through it, all right? But regardless, tropical Capricorn is always on the Tropic of Capricorn. Tropical Cancer is always on the Tropic of Cancer. You will be told again and again by very ignorant people that the tropical zodiac has nothing to do with astronomy because the signs and constellations don't align. It has everything to do with astronomy. It has everything to do with Earth astronomy. It's about the tropics and the equator. All right. Anyway, the moon is not tied to the path of the sun. Neither are the planets. They all have their own orbital paths. So this isn't the best moment to show because in this moment, the moon was in Libra. And so the moon was overhead here. She's in late Libra, almost into Scorpio. But if I move this ahead by a few days, let me just do a thing real quick. Let's put the moon, let's just go now as I'm transmitting today on Saturday, March 2nd, here at 9:28 a.m. currently in Richmond, California, where I live. With the moon in the 1st degree of tropical Sagittarius. Let's cast that map. I mean, you can see, well, and interestingly, the Tropic of Cancer is not so far where it was that Wednesday chart we were looking at. But look at how the moon here, let me zoom in, is south of the Tropic of Capricorn. See, this is the ecliptic. This is the path of the sun. This is the heart of the zodiac. The moon's not tied to that path. Only the moon's nodes are on the ecliptic plane. That's where the moon's path crosses the sun's path, right? And so here we have the moon in what's called southern latitude. Not like that she's south of Earth's equator, that's actually declination, but that she's south of the ecliptic. And that southern latitude, at this very southern declination zone of the zodiac, which does mean south of Earth's equator, allows for the moon here to go out of bounds. She's south of the Tropic of Capricorn. Now, there's all sorts of results from that, like astronomically, like in the Northern Hemisphere point of view, that out of bounds south moon is further from you than sun can ever be. And so she walks lower in the sky than sun ever can. She will also rise further south, set further south than sun ever can. So the out of bounds moon or out of bounds whatever, I was born with out of bounds Mars, like they're going to places the sun cannot. And as I said earlier, this is really important, at this time, and every time when the North Node reaches 0 degrees Aries, and I'm talking about 0 degrees tropical Aries, the astronomical zodiac, the Earth astronomical zodiac. When the North Node is at 0 Aries every 18.6 years, the moon goes most out of bounds every month, both north, typically in Gemini and Cancer, the most northern signs, and south, typically in Sagittarius and Capricorn, the most southern signs. All right, so, hey, Stephen the Jupiterian, it's your birthday. I couldn't get off course to answer your question about the out of bounds moon. It's a totally different thing than the void of course moon. A decent like astrological suggestion for out of bounds planets or out of bounds times is to like color outside the lines, right? Like, so I say this, I mean, out of bounds moon in Sagittarius, like what's happening right now, Sagittarius itself is kind of like, it wants to go out of bounds, you know what I mean? Like, even if you think about the tropical zodiac, where we go north to the Tropic of Cancer, and then we turn around and we go south, to the Tropic of Capricorn, we turn around to go north to the Tropic of Cancer, you see. Like Gemini's taking us to the extreme. And then Cancer's like, no, you're asking too many questions, go home. You see what I mean? Sagittarius is taking us to the great adventure. And then Capricorn's like, no, turn around, you have responsibilities, go back to the tribe, do you see? So out of bounds moon in Gemini or Sagittarius, which are the most common places for out of bounds phenomena, Cancer and Capricorn the other, because again, they are the signs that are most extremely distant from the equator, right? So that's called declination. And out of bounds moon in Gemini and Sagittarius, I just kind of feel like it supports the general Gemini and Sagittariusness. But an out of bounds moon in Cancer and Capricorn, I feel that's kind of contrary to the typical archetypal intent of those signs. And so like I often, like if I'm in a session with somebody and I see they have a Capricorn moon, but it's an out of bounds Capricorn moon, they might hear things from me like, this ain't your grandmama's Capricorn. like this is strange, kind of breaking the rules, going up and out, doing something different. All right. So Stephen, well, that's cool to see. So you say your moon is at 26 degrees of Sagittarius. Is it out of bounds, Stephen? So by the way, as long as we're there, if you want to know if you have out of bounds planets, well, there's a couple things you can do. You can go to an astrocartography map, and as long as you're looking at in mundo placements or measurements, which unlike zodiacal, so zodiacal projects all of the planets to the sun, path of the sun. That's what our charts do. So you can see now here the moon is like on the ecliptic. The zodiacal, sorry, where is she? Here she is. Measurement of the moon is always on the ecliptic, right? In mundo also takes into account that the planets have their own paths, that the moon diverges every month north and south of the ecliptic, the path of the sun. So this is moon south of the ecliptic. And the in mundo positions, like when you look at midheaven lines, okay, so what this is telling us in an astrocartography map, and I'm going to create, by the way, like a whole deep dive course of astrolocality, I think sometime this year. So I would love to know, chat, like, is that something you're interested in? We would do astrocartography, cyclocartography, local space, temple building, all sorts of things, okay? Anyway, in this moment, the moon is at the midheaven here in, I guess this is, like Eastern Siberia. It's at the midheaven right here close to Fiji, which interestingly is a place we're going to go to in an example chart in a bit. But the moon is like directly overhead here in this moment. Okay. And so in an astrocartography map, you can look at the midheaven lines if they're in mundo positions and look at where the so-called zenith circles are that show us where the planets are directly overhead in any given moment of time, like in your birth moment. And if you have planets whose zenith circles are north of the Tropic of Cancer or south of the Tropic of Capricorn, they are out of bounds. The other thing you can do, and maybe the easier thing you do, is you go to a points list of your planets, and if the declination, like the moon's declination here, exceeds 23 degrees and 26 minutes, either north or south, that planet is out of bounds. Why 23 degrees, 26 minutes? Because, friends, that is the tilt angle of Earth, and therefore it is the terrestrial latitude of the tropics of Cancer and the tropics of Capricorn, and that is the tropical zodiac. Okay, so wonderful question, very off course, but that's kind of what we want to talk about today. Moon is not void right now, but in some regards, she kind of might be. Let's get to this weekly Wednesday chart and start with the void of course moon. I do want to check in with chat. And so I'm seeing some, yeah, I do pay attention to the void of course moon. Okay, so for those of you who do, by the way, the next question is, well, what do you do about it? So I'm seeing another one. Work with void of course moon in personal life as far as not doing anything heavy mentally or physically when the moon goes void of course. Sasha, I think it is especially important in horary astrology. Sasha, I'd love for you to kind of expand on that if you'd like. And by the way, for those of you here live in the Zoom space, And I'll share a link at the YouTube place also. We're going to follow this with a community discussion. I'm going to take it out of the Zoom webinar and we'll start a Zoom meeting where you can all share your cameras and microphones and all that stuff. So hopefully, I had planned on that to start at 10 a.m. That's in 24 minutes. It's going to be a little bit later than that. All right. Yes, I do pay attention to void of course moon. I don't really use the void of course moon, says another. So Stephen, I just want to reflect on, because you asked that question, and it's your solar return, happy birthday, that you were born with an out of bounds Sagittarius moon at the galactic center. That's just like as wild as it gets. And by the way, the galactic center, which is in that 27th degree of tropical Sagittarius, and your moon right there, the galactic center is south of the ecliptic. So the only way for the moon to really be at the galactic center is when she's out of bounds south in Sagittarius in those degrees. That's what you've got going on, bro. We should do a reading and I'll show you some of that astronomical happening as well. Cheryl says, yes, I use, yes, for astrocartography. I was like, yes, void of course in astrocartography. How does that work? But you're saying, yes, let's do an astrocartography deep dive. I'm seeing in that zone of the chat tons of yeses, and that would be great. And definitely, okay, it's on. That will be like a 4, 5, 6 week deep dive journey, friends. Shauna, hey, that's me, an out of bounds Capricorn moon in the 8th. Yeah. So not your grandmama's Capricorn. Hopefully that applies to you. Okay, bunches of yes to the astrocartography. Astrolocality, we should call that. There's a whole class there, at least one on relocated charts. So here's one. I'm in Sydney, Australia. It's 4:36 a.m. right now. You brave soul. Please make sure you step aside from this when Venus and Mars rise and go have a look. It might be right when we're wrapping up. We have a few folks here from Australia where it's really early in the morning. Okay, so I don't know if it's today or next week where I have a poll together that just talks about, hey, when are ideal times for you for community discussions, transmissions like this? And I'm sure we're not going to hear 9 a.m. Pacific for our friends in Australia. All right, temple building, please. Okay, right on. All right, cool. Well, let's talk about the void of course moon. Now, importantly, the definition that we use today is not the definition that was once used. What is the definition that we use today? And let me just put this chart away and we'll rap about it. For those of you who have studied with me or have taken classes at the School of Astrology before, you know that typically I have 1,000 slides and animations and chart examples and the like. When I create classes and courses, it will be like that. For these like couple times a month transmissions, it won't be. It's going to be more like how I teach privately, which is to kind of just create it in the moment. All right. And in a sense, that might feel a little bit more void. So I definitely did not plan for this to be the first weekly Wednesday. The election was a little tricky. You know, let me say one more thing about that. It's kind of hilarious. Maybe you've noticed the road rash on my palm. So after I did this weekly Wednesday transmission, I went out and walked the dog. If you saw this weekly Wednesday transmission, I called it grounded mysticism because of this and because of the Mercury cycle, which is currently a Capricorn Pisces cycle. I call it that because Mercury retrograde came between Earth and Sun in Capricorn on December 22nd and now went behind the Sun in Pisces February 28th. So Capricorn, Pisces, grounded mysticism. Saturn in Pisces, grounded mysticism. A Saturn cycle in Pisces, grounded mysticism. You see? Anyway, Mercury is said to be in fall in Pisces. Now, personally, I don't think that means weak Mercury, like some would say. I think that's weak astrology. Galileo Galilei was born with Mercury in Pisces. Like enough said. Does Galileo have a weak Mercury? No. But he was very mystical and he was very like counterculture, especially with his study and his teachings and his tongue. Got him in a lot of trouble. And that's how I treat, and we'll see another chart example along the way today. That's how I treat planets in so-called detriment. That's a detrimental word. It's not an old word, by the way. But Mercury is said to be both an exile in Pisces because he's far from his Virgo home, and Mercury, who's the only planet schizophrenic enough to be an honored guest or exalted in his own home, that's Virgo. Virgo is therefore also said to be in fall in the sign of Pisces. So if you go all medieval scorecard with this moment, and the medieval scorecard is an interesting tool, but I don't get stuck or use it as the foundation for my astrological approach. It's a really challenged Mercury. Mercury, in fact, was what we call peregrine. That's a topic for another time if you'd like. So doing this on a Wednesday with Gemini on the rise might not be the best idea, but there is a statement generally that when Mercury is conjoined the sun within 1 degree, at least in the Hellenistic definition, later they said 17 arc minutes, which at this time he was not, 22 arc minutes from the sun. But within 1 degree, from the Hellenistic point of view, Mercury is said to be cazimi, and there's kind of a superpower to that, what we call accidentalities. It's not essential, which is sign-based like Pisces. It's accidental, which includes many things like the power of houses. The 10th house said to be the second strongest house after the ascendant, the first, like cazimi orientation within 1 degree of the sun. All right. So while there's challenges here from a essential or sign-based point of view for Mercury, there's some dignity, what we call accidentally in traditional astrology. Regardless, look at this. So we have Mercury so-called in fall in Pisces with Saturn and the sun. Okay, so I'm out walking the dog. And I'm about to later that evening teach a class. I've been recording a series of classes with my first teacher, Daniel Jamario, for his turning of the Aegis Mystery School, which is quite an honor. We've been doing this like 3 nights a week for a while now, and it will continue. So I needed to walk the dog. It had been raining. It finally cleared up. I had like a little bit of time between this weekly Wednesday transmission and recording this class with Daniel. And so I walk Isabel, and we're getting close to the house. And sometimes she'll kind of pull home. At this day, she wasn't. So I'm just like, I'm kind of rushing because I want to exercise and also get back to do my thing. The neighbor comes up, and importantly, an older man, and very empathically, compassionately, which I'll say are important too. He steps off the sidewalk. He walked up into a driveway that wasn't his own to make room for Isabel and myself. It's very nice of him, right? As I'm saying thank you for that, I just randomly fell and hurt my hand, and I hurt my knee. And unfortunately, I was close to home, so I got back here and dressed my wounds, which looked a lot worse than this at the time, last Wednesday. And I had to get on late with Daniel and whatever. We did our thing, right? So why am I sharing this at all? Because, it wasn't until I looked at this chart for this weekly Wednesday where I was so inspired to start. I was planning, as I said earlier, to do it a couple weeks later. Where I was looking at an electional chart, right? What is it? Electional astrology. We elect moments, we choose moments where the planets are in powerful positions to help guide that moment. By the way, when I do electional astrology with people, let's say somebody's starting a business, I want to not only find a good launch moment for their business, but I'm going to ask them questions like, hey, when do you plan to have employees? And they might say, it's not going to happen for a couple years. Well, I want to make sure that the chart is spring loaded so that in our timing techniques, there's reflections of employees coming into the fold in 2 years. Do you see what I mean? If they have a business plan, if they have it mapped out, I want to make sure that the moment is good, but also that the moments to come will support their vision for how their company is meant to evolve. I didn't do much of that here. I was just inspired to go. Remember, astrologers, and before you found electional astrology, if you use it, remember how you used to just do stuff because time aligned and your intuition said now, which dare I say would be a much more Pisces Pisces Saturn way to go about things. Is the foundation of your own intuition, It's rare these days when I do a thing without first casting a chart. And sometimes it's like, ooh, I've felt the right time. Go. And sometimes it's like, ooh, this is not the right time at all. Wait. And sometimes I don't wait, like Wednesday. Sometimes I do. There was a time in March of 2020 when somebody had stolen the catalytic converter from my car. I found out what it cost to repair, and I was like, that's a drag. I wondered if maybe it was a sign that was telling me I should level up. I actually had a little bit of change in the bank at the time, and so I could. But I looked at the charts. It was a time like this, Mercury and Pisces. But Mercury was actually retrograde at the time, and I was like, you know what, actually, I think we're going to honor that. That whole thing of don't buy things, especially a car during Mercury retrograde. I was like, why not just wait? Like, I don't need a car right now anyway. And then Mercury went direct, but there was just this whole Pisces thing. And I was like, I think I'll wait until Mercury's in Aries. Like, why not? I don't need a car right now. Well, then what happened is the powers that shouldn't be shut down the whole world through manipulation of empathy, which was very much in the charts, but we don't talk about that stuff, or do we? Anyway, so I didn't need a car for a long time. And so just me kind of honoring what the electional said, even though I didn't really agree with it, like I was just kind of excited to move forward, it ended up proving quite true that it was wise for me to wait. Do you see what I mean? And so maybe this chart wasn't the day for the launch, because it's a chart with some issues if you're into the whole electional astrology trip. But I try not to be too into it, especially when I study many astrologies. I mean, some astrologies, like we can switch this zodiac to a sidereal zodiac. And in that case, and this is true for Galileo as well, we're going to see Mercury in Aquarius next to Saturn at home. And you see what I'm saying? Like when you study astrology, it's from a Gemini point of view, it's massively beautiful because it's an endless study. There's so many ways to pet the cosmic cat, as I like to say. From more of a Capricornian or maybe Saturnian point of view, it's a drag. Because if you master one paradigm, you are running as fast as you can from the dictates of another. Like we'd love for there to be one right way to do astrology. By the way, I run as fast as I can by astrologers who pretend to have figured it out. But that's just how I'm wired. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Yang Lee here in the chat. Exactly. So she writes, even the body parts involved, hand and knee, evoke Mercury and Saturn, right? So this is why I wanted to share this. So a couple of things I was looking at, I was like, all right, it's a void of course moon, or is it? I think I should teach a little class about that. So here we are. The other thing I saw is this, and it's like, do I really want this to be the election? I like some of the things here, by the way. So like in solar arc directions, Venus will arc to the midheaven in less than 2 years. My plan is to do these weekly Wednesdays at least for a year. And so there's a kind of spring-loaded seeded thing. Mercury, Saturn especially, and the sun are right at the top of the chart. I see that as a powerful design. I've utilized that actually before in elections and like this with Pisces planets at the top of a Gemini chart. I launched the School of Earth Astrology with an image like that, actually. Is it wise? And the School of Earth Astrology has been kind of void for a little bit. So, these things happen. Anyway, so yeah, the hilarious thing is, right, so why an older man neighbor? Because Saturn is often indicative of older men. He was very compassionate or empathic Pisces. To step out of my ways, I was walking the dog. Do you know that since Mercury or Hermes stole Apollo or Helios's, Phoebe's bulls, the herd, Mercury's taken charge of animals, right? So Mercury's a planet we associate with animals and even pets. So I'm walking the dog. Mercury's in fall in Pisces. I fall, right? As I'm thanking the older man for being compassionate. And I hurt my hand and my knee. Right, like I need to have my hand on this thing so I'm just not bleeding on my stuff right now. And in medical astrology, the knees are associated with Capricorn. Some say more so with the 10th house. From a planetary point of view, most with Saturn. Though usually people go more sign or especially house-based. So it might be a stretch. Mercury can represent arms and hands because Gemini does. But some look more to the sign of Gemini. Some look more to the natal third house or the third house of the month. Again, many ways to bet the cosmic cat. Lots of agreements, disagreements, right? But Virgo, Mercury's other sign, would indicate more like the intestinal tract, digestion. Gemini is said to be the lungs, shoulders, arms, hands, fingers. Right. So just like hurt the Mercury, hurt the Saturn because I'm walking the dog, Mercury, while an old man, Saturn, compassionately steps out of my way. And while I'm thanking him for that, I just completely fall. And. So sometimes astrology is so ridiculously literal. If you watch that Grounded Mysticism transmission on this first weekly Wednesday, you heard me announce that I'm also a skeptic. Astrology proves herself to me every day. It's amazing. But it's also a skeptic. So, and this is a fun question from Nancy here. I was born during a void of course moon. First of all, I'll ask, were you? And secondly, was hoping to talk more on void of course moon today. Have I missed something? Right. What you are not missing is kind of a void of coursey transmission, which if you know my wiring, you'll know might just be intentional. Or maybe not. Okay, so what is the void of course moon? So let's first talk about the modern point of view. I assume, Nancy, when you say you were born with a void of course moon, or when I say I was born with a void of course moon, or when I show this chart for my first weekly Wednesday, and we say this is a void of course moon, we are talking about the modern point of view of what a void of course moon is. So what is that? From the modern point of view, it is when the moon has made her last Ptolemaic aspect during the course through a particular sign. Okay, what are the Ptolemaic aspects? Some call these the major aspects. They are the opposition, the two trines, the two squares, the two sextiles, right? So the 7 rays. We also say the cohabitation or the conjunction, right? So there's 8. Conjunction, 2 sextiles, 2 squares, 2 trines, the 1 opposition. So every sign has 4 blind spots or inconjuncts. That word inconjunct these days is typically used to speak about the quincunx, the 150-degree angle. By the way, we actually have lacunas or blind spots in our vision at 150 degrees because the optic nerve intersects the eyeball at 150 degrees. So you can go online, you can play with your blind spots. It's a pretty cool thing to do. Stereoscopic vision, 2-eye vision, heals that. So this is actually the Greek optic theory and the human biology behind the idea that the quincunx, which is the signs neighboring the opposite sign, are blind or inconjunct. Okay, well, so are the neighboring signs. So if we look from Libra, for example, what are Libra's neighbors? Virgo and Scorpio. Libra is said to be blind to both Virgo and Scorpio, and also blind to her partner, who is Libra's partner, Aries. Blind not to her partner, that's the opposition, but blind to her partner's neighbors. I appreciate looking at it that way, because the truth is Libra and Aries are 2 sides of one thing. Libra, othership, Aries, selfness. They meet in the middle way of right relationship. All right, so I like to think of Libra as blind to her neighbors, or his neighbors, and Libra is blind to the neighbors of her partner, who is Aries, right? So Libra blind to Virgo and Scorpio, and blind to the neighbors of Aries, which of course are Pisces and Taurus, right? So traditionally, those are not aspects, right? And by the way, if you do this from the ascendant, you're going to find the 12th house, the 8th house, the 6th house, and the 2nd house, traditionally speaking, the so-called, I don't like the term, but bad houses. Why? Because the ascendant cannot see them. Yeah? Okay. So now most void of course calculations even in this time of modern astrology, limit the aspects of the moon when considering void of course and translation of light to the planets that we can see with our naked eye. Okay, to the traditional 7, or really 6, because we're talking about the moon making aspects. And this is moon aspecting Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And we stop there. Now, some astrologers will look to Uranus and Neptune and Pluto and Chiron. Maybe some these days are adding asteroids like Vesta and Ceres to that mix. Chiron is a centaur. Why not work with Phobos and the other centaurs too? If working with Vesta and Ceres, why not also work with Pallas and Juno? Why not work with the hundreds of thousands of asteroids that the moon would never go void? Haumea, Makemake, Quaoar, and other things I can't even pronounce. Eris, do you know what I mean? So typically, void of course calculations are reserved for the moon making Ptolemaic, or the major aspects of conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition to the visible planets, therefore Saturn being the slowest of them. And I bet you all know about this. If you don't, there you go. This is modern vision of the void of course. And sadly, while many teach void of course, and what is typically taught about void of course, it sounds eerily resonant to the modern teachings of what not to do when Mercury is retrograde, which is like everything. I shouldn't have walked the dog. I should have waited until the moon ingressed Scorpio. We'll see that in the chart. Maybe. But then the dog wouldn't have had a walk. I certainly shouldn't have launched my first weekly Wednesday. They'll go nowhere. But, people say if the moon is void of course, then you should be too. So stop what you're doing. Take time to go within, meditate, close your eyes, rest. All right, well, from the modern point of view, moon goes void like every 2-3 days, sometimes for more than a day at a time. And many of us have like lives and jobs and things. So it's a good encouragement to remember to get pensive, meditative, and the like. But most of us might just be poisoned by awareness of moon's regular void of courseness, because maybe we're at a job where we're responsible for others' safeties, and then we just get terrified that we're not going to be able to do that, and they're not going to stay safe, and they're going to get hurt, and that's on us. And so we just shut down the power plant for 2.5 days, or a day, or a half a day, or whatever it may be. And that's when astrology is ridiculous, in my point of view. We want to use astrology as a way in, not as a way out. We want to use astrology, not be used by astrology. And it's a fine line in both of those regards, isn't it? Okay. So let's just look at a couple examples here of a void of course moon. From this modern point of view. And then I'm going to take you back to older images for what a void of course moon is. Here, actually, let me say, one more thing about this. Why do we care? And what is the translation of light? And I don't think it's today, but maybe when we get to some chart examples, what is collection of light, which is another beautiful side of the doctrine. So 2 things to express here. One, from the old image of the universe, or all that is, where Earth is the center, and we're surrounded by these heavenly spheres, right? The fastest moving planet, which is the moon, and remember, planet comes from the Greek planetus, which means moving star. So moon and sun were considered, along with Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the visible lights to be the sacred seven, right? 12 signs, 7 planetes. So the moon is the one who gets most quickly around the zodiac, which is why we call that direction moonwise in the tradition. 27 and a third days to get around the tropical zodiac, the tropical month. Yeah. Where it takes Mercury, Venus, and the sun, Mercury and Venus about a year to do so. The sun definitely 1 year to get around the zodiac, right? Mars about 2 years, Jupiter about 12 years, Saturn about 29 and a half years, right? So when we look at these planetary spheres, like this is the old kind of alchemist, like the old Ptolemy point of view, and he wasn't alone in this, of course. Earth, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. That order, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, often called the Chaldean order, right? Going back to the Chaldean astrologers, who you may know as like Babylonian, all right? Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, stars, God, right? Some do stars zodiac. I think the zodiac is beneath our feet, but that's a tale for another time. So there's an old image, for example, that when you're out in spirit in the place of the one, you're just pure light. And then you come through the realm of the fixed stars, which is called 2. And then you get to Saturn, which is called 3, the third. That's why, by the way, if you're familiar with them, the magic square of Saturn is 3 by 3, of Jupiter 4 by 4, etc. Okay, because it's the one, the realm of the stars, and then we get to Saturn. Okay, and as you're falling in as a pure spirit, depending on your philosophy, you're either, as you come through Saturn's realms and collect your, for me, it was like Leo Saturn code in my nativity. You're either collecting Saturn's like blessings or Saturn's curses, and maybe both, right? And for those of you, by the way, who said you showed up for a Void of Course Moon class, this is part of it. And it's a really important part of it that's not lost. So I'm not just void at this point. I'm translating light, should you choose to receive it. All right. So then we fall in through Jupiter and collect Jupiter's blessings or Jupiter's curses, or perhaps both. We fall through Mars and the sun, right? And we come down here, and then some say, and this is very beautiful, on the way out, right? So when you die, you'll go through the realm of the moon and kind of deal with that complex and purify, and then you'll go to Mercury. So where were you too cunning and crafty? You'll go to Venus. Where was the lust, right? So clean and purify. And then by that time we go through Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and the stars, we are just pure light once again. And then we probably fall back in, right? Okay, so why share any of that? Because the moon is the sphere who is closest to us. So anything that's coming through Saturn, that's coming through Saturn and Jupiter, that's coming through Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, and Mercury, they have to come through the world of the moon to get to you. This is one of the moon's principal responsibilities from the old spiritual point of view. Yes? So just be there and actually do this with your chart. I have Jupiter in Aries. How does that get filtered through Gemini moon space? Or as I look at this chart for my first weekly Wednesday, Jupiter's in Taurus. How does that come through? Libra moon space. Can it? Those signs are in conjunct. But they, by the way, Taurus and Libra are signs that are said to be like and girding. And the reason why is they are both associated with the planet Venus. Yes? Okay. And I'm really excited to get to a chart example of somebody I dreamed about randomly last night. Okay. So now, translation of light. The other thing is the moon, of course, moves most quickly about the zodiac. And it is seen that one of her great jobs or roles is to translate the light of one conversation she has had to the next. Now, I really love this point of view, and I like to express this through our personal experience. All right? So let's say you got a big presentation at your corporate job today. Go you, climb that ladder. And you're nervous about it, you know? So, say you wake up and, your husband knows about this, but instead of kind of helping out, maybe sharing his love for you in the morning, maybe even like preparing some food and something for you for your big day, right? Your big presentation day. Maybe instead he argues with you about that bullshit that he always argues with you about, because whatever, And you're just so frustrated because he knows you have this big thing and he could have been helpful. He could have been helpful, but he chose not to be. Right? Maybe it's not a choice, whatever, it's a pattern. He's not alone in this, but there you're in that space, right? So let's just now live in two dimensions, Schrodinger's cat style, right? Like one dimension, you woke up and husband had a meal prepared for you and you got this, honey. There's no way you're not getting this promotion. I believe in you, you know. And in the other dimension, husband says this terrible thing, expects you to have his coffee ready, some nonsense, right? So we're in these two dimensions, all right? Let's say in both of these dimensions, you're driving to work now. One, you're kind of really happy because you have a good husband, and that's helped give you the fire. And another one, you're really pissed because you've had a bad husband, but maybe that gave you some fire. And let's say in both of these dimensions, you're in traffic because you're working a corporate job. And some terrible driver cuts you off and almost wrecks your car in another one. Okay, well, in the dimension where you had that really helpful husband, maybe you're not so triggered by a bad driver. And you're like, you know what? I've done it too. We all have our days. And the other one where you're already so angry because of this bad experience you had at home again, because you got a bad husband, at least sometimes. Maybe you honk at the guy and then you're just like multiplying the anger space, okay? All right, well, both of these dimensions, you get to work now and you have your big presentation for the boss, the council. And if you do it well, you know you're going to get promoted. And if you do it poorly, you know you're not. And you could sure use the promotion because you've been in this job forever. You've been passed by all the things. So let's say you're in this dimension where you kind of have love in your heart. You had a good husband who believes in you, reminds you to believe in yourself. You were tolerant of the road raging asshole because you're a good person. And you go in there and you give your presentation. And in this other dimension, you got all this angst and fire. Your husband was mean. You're wondering about leaving him and somebody tries to run you off the road. You honk your horn at them. In which of these dimensions do you get promoted? Maybe the answer is both. The answer could actually be the one where you're all kind of charged up and angry. Because maybe you're in some kind of patriarchal job and they want you to be like, a warrior. Maybe not. It really kind of depends on what kind of job you have, what kind of boss you have, right? Let's say the boss is indicated by Saturn in a chart. And he's not always, nearly ever. So I kind of am embarrassed to have said that. Usually we would look to the planet that governs the 10th to express employer. And no, the 10th is not always Capricorn. The world spins. But let's say it's Saturn. Well, what sign is Saturn in? What's his condition? Is he receiving a difficult transit? Is he receiving blessings, etc.? Do you know what I mean? What planet represents your husband? The planet that governs the 7th. What's his condition in the chart? How's he looking? Is he turned on through our time techniques, our time lord technique? There's always a million questions if you want to do astrology right or well. I don't know, you can do it right. You can do it well. So why am I sharing all of this? Because this really speaks to a human experience and, just put your own day into this. of how we translate light. The energy you hold from your previous encounter will be brought to your next. Yes? Unless you're really good at just kind of purge and reset, which is important training, but I'm not good at that. And I don't think we're supposed to be. I think we're supposed to translate the light. There is this thing that I heard from a friend who practices in kind of Gurdjieffian spirituality. And Gurdjieff in like Beelzebub's tales to his grandson, he has some really weird and crazy things. And one of them is he speaks about how, I mean, it's tricky because I love the moon personally. And I have a hard time with the people who think that the moon is some like evil device that's here to keep us enslaved in a body. I hear that a lot from the New Age folk. I think the moon is here to keep us, to allow us to incarnate. And maybe you could say that's the same thing. Anyway, in this particular wisdom I received, the image was that you must feed the moon. All right. And so it actually speaks a little bit closely to what I was saying before of when you die, you'll kind of go rise up and you'll kind of have your lunar things purified as you pass through the realm of the moon. But then you got to deal with your Mercury stuff and your Venus stuff. This one kind of had just the moon doing it all. And like that's kind of like where Judgment Day-ish or something is going to happen. I don't know if you can hear Isabel barking, but she's like, that's how it is, kids. Anyway, so the thing that was fun from this is I was like, well, if I'm gonna have to feed the moon at the end of my life, why don't I just feed her every night? And wouldn't that make it easier for me? So I wish I was in this practice regularly. Sometimes I step into it. There was a time where my life afforded a little bit more. Well, I don't know. There was just a time when I was more on my way. And every night, whether I could see her or not, but if I could see her, if the clouds allowed in the particular phase, I would go out and do this visibly with the moon. And if I couldn't see her, I know astronomy, so maybe the moon's in the third down here, and I would just kind of face the moon and vision her phase, and I would feed the moon. And what that looks like for me, and it's a practice I highly promote, is like, all right, this thing happened to me. Some guy almost wrecked me when I went to try to get this promotion, and I didn't get it, and I'm just, or I think I did really well with my promotion speech. I think I'm going to get the job, and I'm not going to sleep because I'm so nervous about it. I might not even find out tomorrow. I'm not going to sleep all week until I find it. You know what I mean? So let me just feed all that angst and all that to the moon. Just please receive this and then reflect back to me in my dreams while I sleep deeply. And I used to sleep more deeply when I did this, right? So what I'm sharing this is like, I think this is a good practice. Also, not only like every night, feed the moon with your passions and pains and all things of the day. But do this also, or let the moon do this every couple days when she goes void, of course. At least from the modern point of view. I want to honor something that came in from chat here, which is change planet to heavenly sphere, in my remark. Yep, well, traditionally they're one and the same, at least from my point of view. So I hear you. But yeah, you rise up through the planetary spheres. But why are there planetary spheres? Because there's planets. And why are they assigned as they are? Because of the motion of the planets and their speed through the zodiac, their periodicity. And I don't personally connect with planetary spheres visually, and I'm a sky guy. I woke up, I slept in my van the other night so I could watch Venus and Mars dance together above the Marin Marsh. I didn't see Venus and Mars's spheres, I saw Venus and Mars, but their spheres are described by their motion in my sky. So that's why I kind of prefer to keep it with planet personally, but planetary sphere resonates more with you. So you do you. All right. So there's another one here. I tend to say moving stars and luminaries. Well, traditionally, the luminaries are moving stars. So it's a weird thing. It's not like the ancients didn't honor that the sun and the moon were very different than Venus and Mars, Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. right? But they are stars, and we know this of the sun now, that literally move through the stars, right? Through the backdrop of the so-called fixed stars, right? So they're called moving stars. The planet test includes them. And I mean, I appreciate kind of separating the luminaries from the moving stars, but do the moving stars and also include Uranus, Neptune, whatever? And of course, we have 7 days of the week, 7 alchemical metals for the 7 visible planet tusks, which include the moon and the sun. So that's why I stay there. Okay. Anyway, that's fun. It's nice to have grammar challenged and all that, you know? So speaking of grammar, and I mention this a lot, and I really appreciate that it was taught to me pretty early in my astrological adventure by Kent Bai, who's a really great dude, who, because he's such a great dude, actually didn't interrupt me during my talk about the Pluto-Uranus square of the time. This was in 2013. But instead afterwards was like, hey buddy, come here. It's like, welcome to astrology. That was a really cool talk. And you know, it's probably good grammar to call that a Uranus-Pluto square. And I was like, what? Why? Right? If Uranus is squaring Pluto, then Pluto is squaring Uranus. Square's a square, dude. He said, no, speak the name of the faster moving planet first. He didn't even say why, but I uncoded it by learning that good grammar. Like if you speak the name of the faster moving planet first in an aspect, you can see time. You can see where we're coming from. You can see where we're going. All right, so this is really important, and why translation of light is not only something that the moon does, but something that mostly the moon does. Why? Because the moon moves most quickly. Okay, so the idea is that moon is translating the light from her previous conversation was that a husband who cooked me breakfast, or one who looked for his newspaper and his coffee, to her next, the road raging guy on the highway. Did I have love to give or hate? To the next, my presentation at the workplace. Let's say after the presentation, I go have lunch with my sister, who's amazingly supportive. And how did it go for you? And I'm either like, oh, it was terrible. I've had this really bad day. And she's like, I love you and I will always love you anyway. Or you're like, I think it was great. And she's like, of course it was. You're a superstar. Versus the sister that you'd rather not sit down, you know, in any case with, right? You see what I'm saying? So this all has to do with like who the planets are in the chart at the time, how they engage with one another, right? These kinds of trips. All right. So the idea of void, of course, is the moon has finished her gig for that quote unquote day. And why do I say quote unquote? Because it's not like the day being the earth spinning with respect to either the star's sidereal day or to the sun, the star of ours, the solar day. It's like the moon moving through a sign. All right. On average, moon takes 2.3 days to transit a sign of the zodiac. So her average speed and moon speed changes significantly. So it's like 2 to 3 days, moon moving through a sign. All right. Whence moon has made her final Ptolemaic aspect, conjunction, sextile, square, trine, and opposition to a visible planet. Most use that rule, some don't, but to a visible planet, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Once she has finalized and finished her job in that sign, which is to translate this to that, to this, to that, to that, then she is void until she moves into the next sign. That's the modern approach. And it's been used for centuries, and it's interesting. And in this approach, moon will go void, of course, in every sign. Once she is finished making her aspects in that sign before she jumps the wall into the next one. Okay, some say the moon can't go void in Sagittarius, which is interesting. I feel like all signs should have equal opportunity. Okay, so let's look at this chart. Moon here is at 2553 Libra. And the only planet in a more advanced degree of their respective sign is Neptune at 2641 Pisces. Okay. Now, even if we did include Neptune in the trip, I'm going to push this button, displayed points, old school, and Neptune goes away, okay? Because most will, as I said before, kind of limit the void of course moon and the translation of light ideas to Ptolemaic aspects. So let's do that. Or let's actually even go, do I have Ptolemy on here? Maybe traditional would work. So trine, squares, oppositions, right? And we stop at Saturn, right? So once I take Neptune away, there's no planet. We're not going to include the lots. This is the lot of fortune and the lot of spirit. We're not going to include the nodes either. Okay. Then Moon has, she has made her last aspect. Let's rewind some days. But let's put Neptune back on real quick and say, even if we did include Neptune, well, if we're only working with Ptolemaic aspects, Libra Moon does not aspect Pisces Neptune anyway. These signs are said to have some generosity through Venus, but because that's a quincunx, right? That's an inconjunct. So, I mean, if I go into like my harmonic world, which I love to do, we see actually a pretty strong quincunx between Moon and Neptune within a degree. But that's not happening for most. And like if you do like harmonic aspects for void, of course, the Moon will never go void. Okay. So let me go back into like traditional aspects. So sextile squares, trines in opposition, conjunction. And let's go to only kind of an old school image of planets. All right. And let's just rewind a couple of days and we'll track Moon through Libra. So I can just here in the Astro Gold software ask for Moon, ingress, Libra, and here we go. All right, so let's just look at Moon's Libra schedule earlier this week. She came into Libra, tropical Libra, at the equinox point on Moon Day, on Monday, right? And she's looking around, and what does she see? Hey, I thought we were old school. Let me do this in a different way. I'm going to leave the nodes on there because they're the nodes. Okay, cool. What does she see? Well, she doesn't see Jupiter because Libra and Taurus are quincunx, inconjunct. She doesn't see Mercury, Sun, or Saturn because Libra and Pisces are quincunx, inconjunct. So the only thing that Moon sees from this old school point of view are Mars and Venus. So here she is at 0 degrees. She's going to have to travel almost a day's worth of time. The Moon's average travel is 13 1/3 degrees per day before she trines Mars. Let me just move through hours so we can actually watch the sky spin. That's called the primary motion, rising in the east, setting in the west. And we'll also watch most quickly the Moon moving in the secondary motion, which is the west to east motion through the signs. So this is an hour later, and an hour later. And the Moon moves about 1/2 degree an hour. So it's going to be like 20 hours before she's moved 10 degrees and perfects her trine with Mars. Somewhere in here, right? Well, as soon as she does, and typically we'll say like a trine's a trine, like it's the most benefic aspect, right? So let's go here. I mean, at this time, Mars represents, depending on house system you use, the 3rd and the 10th. Let's say the 10th and the 7th. Why the 7th? Because Cancer, so Moon. Midheaven, Scorpio, so Mars. I mean, this might be an example. It's not really clean horary, but it might be an example where, husband is supporting you in what you're doing for the job. that's a stretch. Many of you out there are like, no. But anyway, let me just leave that there. I just wanted to like invoke that thing we were saying before. Okay, so now Moon is going to carry Mars to Venus, right? Because here's her Moon Mars trine, and then her next engagement, and it won't be that much later because Venus and Mars are so close, right? She's going to have to move another 3.5 degrees, which is about 7 hours, to perfect her trine with Venus. And then afterwards, she's got nothing left to do. So that's the void, of course, Moon from the modern point of view. And she's void for a good chunk of her travel. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple other void, of course, Moon definitions where we'll see that this Moon is not void, or perhaps is. There's many different criteria over time. But before that, let me just say the importance of Moon translating Venus to Mars. We go back to Moon trine Mars. And let me show this on an aspect grid. All right, so the Moon Mars trine here is perfect, right? And push the computer button. We have the exact moment of the Moon perfecting her aspects to Mars. And you see here, Moon 2 degrees and 25 minutes from a perfect trine with Venus. Let's look at that in the chart. And very importantly, and I think most of you know this, we see this A for what? Applying, okay? Because Moon has not yet trined Venus. She is applying to trine Venus. This is why you speak the name of the faster moving planet first. Who moves faster, Moon or Venus? Always the Moon, who never retrogrades and is the fastest planet around the track. And yes, I'm calling Moon planet, and I'm just going to keep doing that because I'm comparing her travel to the travel of beings like Mercury and Venus and Mars, right? So it's Moon who aspects Mars, not Mars who aspects Venus. Like when you have a Mars, sorry, not Mars who aspects Moon. When you have like a Moon-Mars square in your nativity, it feels like Mars is squaring the Moon, right? So I don't want to negate that in any way. It's very real. But if you do learn the good grammar of speaking the faster moving planet first in an aspect, then you can see time, right? Let's go an hour later. I can see that Moon has already trined Mars. Yes? And that Moon will now next trine Venus. She is separating from Mars. Let's look at the grid. Moon trine Mars, separating S, Moon A, applying to Venus, right? So speak the name of the faster moving planet first. Well, who moves faster, Venus or Mars? Typically Venus. Sometimes not, but at this time, definitely Venus. Let's just look at that. Venus's daily speed, 1.25 degrees. Mars cannot do that. Okay, Mars's daily speed of about 3/4 of a degree, which by the way is fast Mars. But Venus is moving faster than Mars. So this is a Venus-Mars conjunction. And when I speak that way in good grammar, then I can see that Venus is separating from Mars. All right, let's look at that on the grid. Venus conjunct Mars, 2.5 degrees, S for separating. Now, the ancients gave a lot more attention to a separating aspect than to an applying aspect than to a separating aspect. Think about when you're going in to give that big talk at your job to try to get the promotion versus when you're walking away from it and you don't know if you're going to get it or not, but you did your thing, right? It's a very different experience. Some example that people use that won't apply to everybody is the kids who can't sleep because Santa's coming and what's going to be under the tree. Applying versus they unwrap their presents and how many days to next Christmas, separating. Terrible consumerist way to express modern Christmas, and you know I'm not into that shit. Anyway, you're going into the big test or you're leaving the test. And whether you know you rocked it or you know you failed, whatever it's done, it's behind you. Now, I use this and I'm very interested in natal charts. Is it the soil from which we are sprouting, separating, or is it the air into which we are branching, applying? And so it's a heavy example, but it's one I use to get the point across, and it's one I'm so sad to say I have seen many times. I might see a strong aspect in somebody's natal chart that seems to suggest sexual abuse in youth. I think that statement, the way that I just said, seems to suggest is very important. Anyway, if the aspect is applying and therefore perfected after they were born, it hasn't happened yet. But if the aspect is separating, it perfected before they were born, it already happened. And what I have seen many times is that story of abuse is in their experience, but not in their personal experience. It happened to mom or it happened to dad. And something I've seen many more times than 20 is mom was abused. And so the way that I was abused as a result is mom wouldn't let me date. She guarded me. She watched over me, right? I never got to explore love or passion or whatever until I was later out of the house. And even then it felt wrong and weird and that I was unsafe because I was trained in that way. Do you see what I'm saying? So application and separation, it's very essential and it's completely necessary if you want to tune into the void of course tradition, okay? So, and here's an interesting place where, like in a horary chart, for example, I want to make this easy, so let me go forward a couple hours here. Okay, let's say I cast this chart when somebody asked me, will this woman marry me? I'm thinking about proposing. I'm totally freaked out about it. And I kind of want to know before I go in, is she going to say yes? To which, by the way, as an astrologer, I would respond, you sure? You sure you want to look at that? Like, bro, roll the dice. Do you know what I'm saying? But if you feel like you might as well get the planetary powers behind you and wait, well, like if it was just like, hey, just propose tomorrow. Like it's all lining up and propose sometime around 3:30 p.m. and you got it, If you believe in that, then it's worth going there, right? So why did I cast this particular chart to respond to that question? Because if I'm asking, will she marry me? I, in this case, Aries rising, which is me, am just expressed by Mars, right? She, the partner, 7th house, Libra, is expressed by Venus. Now that the moon, who can be a general indicator for me always, or for you if you're asking the question, whatever, is in the 7th, helps us understand that you're kind of, yeah, of course you're asking this question and you want to ask that big question, okay? Well, now if she is Venus and I am Mars, well, the good news is they're conjunct, but she's separating from me. And there's a lot of disagreement, of course, but most would say because Venus is separating from Mars, because she is separating from me, she's not going to say yes. By the way, there's a bunch of things happening in hidden realms, and on, right? But because the moon is translating Mars to Venus, she has trined Mars. She will next trine Venus. She serves like a glue to connect the two, to keep their bond alive. And therefore the answer is yes, she says yes. Let me stop and check in with the chat. Did everybody understand that? Because this is one of the most common applications of translation of light in horary astrology. So we see some yeses here, some yes exclamation point, which is fun because that kind of feels to me like maybe it's a breakthrough for you, like you've looked at this before and that helped make it sense. We're seeing a few exclamation points here, which feels great. And maybe just because we're all excited about this nerdy stuff, which wants me to accelerate out of this void space and into a community discussion. So I'll try to move a little faster. Okay, but I'm seeing a lot of yeses here and no nos, which is great. Good to have this understanding of application separation, I see. Can you please repeat the air into branching analogy? Oh, okay, yeah. So the idea is the tree was a seed in the soil. It's coming from there. The soil is the nutrients of your youth and perhaps ancestry, maybe past lives. If you do that thing, right, the tree is branching into the air. Or climbing towards the heavens. So earth and heaven is maybe a better way to say that. That's why, by the way, I drink a ton of pu'er. There's a lot of other reasons too, because it comes from old trees that are like deeply rooted, but have been reaching towards the stars for so many years. Okay, cool. So, we could do a bunch of horary examples. Somebody just asked me, what is the drink called? Pu'er tea is one of the oldest teas. It comes only from the Yunnan province of China. It's spelled, I'll put it in the chat. Pu, you usually spell like Pu apostrophe ERH. It's one of the most amazing things. If you drink some, I suggest starting with not like raw pu'er, but black cooked pu'er. Anyway, ask me about that another time. I want to move forward. Okay. Can I ask if the aspect was separating, could it be an incident that happened in a past life? Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So RuPaul, I think that's a great question. Absolutely. And it kind of depends on your cosmology. Like, do I even know past lives exist, right? Where are you coming from with that, right? But it is something in your past. So some are going to prefer more of like, my past is my ancestors, those which came before me. Maybe even this past of this land is the people who lived here before me. Do you feel me? So like whatever, it's just separating. It already happened. It's in your past. And by the way, sometimes it's a day in your past. Sometimes it's 3 days in your past. There's kind of a different level in that, right? But let's just say past and future, right? Or I'll say like the earth from which we sprout, the heavens towards which we reach, you know? Yeah, so past life, future lives you could even do. Or I would say like it's already happened, it's going to happen. And in the example I offered, it was something that happened to my mom. She came before me. And so I'm still feeling the pressure of it because it's in my chart. And let's just say we look at mom's chart, which I would only do with consent, and she has something similar, but it's applying. I wouldn't in any way be surprised. I was actually pleasantly surprised when I learned that this is what some of the ancients were doing with application and separation, because I didn't learn that. I just knew that it should be that way. And I'm still of that belief. And I probably learned that this is what some of the ancients were doing with separation application. I'm guessing from Demetra George. So I'm holding here her Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice. Because in this book, and I'm not going to read from it, I kind of had intended to, but I'm just looking at the time and I want to get into this community discussion with y'all and learn from you. And I want to do a couple of live chart examples. But in this book, I read about different ideas throughout astrological tradition of what the void of course moon is and is not. And that this idea of the moon being void every time she is finished making Ptolemaic aspects to visible planets in a sign is not the old way to go about it. So let's just get from this place. Here we have moon, whose ray, her trine ray, is between Mars and Venus, and therefore moon is separating from the trine with Mars, applying to the trine with Venus. Let's go forward a few hours, and now moon has trine Venus. I mean, they're so like close here, partile, same degree. So let's just go a few more hours forward. Let's actually go here and ask that same question. Will she marry me? Well, in this case, she is Mars. I am Venus, Libra rising, especially with the moon in the first. Venus is separating from Mars. Moon is no longer translating the light of Mars to Venus to keep them connected. Jupiter's doing some stuff, but anyway. So it's kind of like, I bet you won't even ask. No, I would never say that. Well, I might get there with a client, but I wouldn't say it that way. I hope. I have my days, Okay. So anyway, from a modern point of view, the moon here is now void of course. So let me get back to this weekly Wednesday thing. Why start a thing when the moon is void of course? Because until moon moves into Scorpio, she's just lost in her way. Well, so am I, son. Somebody just asked, well, what about void of course moon in natal charts? Of course, a million differences of opinions. I brought forward my nativity here. Okay, now, if I include Chiron in this mix, and I personally don't, although I definitely feel and inspired by, and sometimes challenged by the moon Chiron connection in my nativity. Right, so I was born with moon applying to sextile Chiron, moon applying to sextile Chiron, and it's strong, it's within a degree, it's partile and all that, right? They're both in 25 and change, the 26 degrees of their sign. It's the only thing my moon will do before jumping the wall into Cancer. So some will call this a moon-Mars conjunction, some don't, right? Let's turn this to a whole sign chart to look more at that kind of imagery, where moon is, yes, within 6.5 degrees of Mars here, and we might even see it on the grid. Yeah, moon applying to conjoin Mars, 6 degrees and 34 minutes. But there's just a wall between them, right? So a fun question always, let's sure I spill the tea, don't spill the tea, is the zodiac just a smooth dial, or is it kind of a 12-geared wheel? And that Libra and Scorpio, or in this case that we were looking at, Gemini and Cancer, are separated by a wall. And you're going to move from Gemini, Mercury's world, into Cancer, the moon's world. And you're going to move from yang to yin, or I prefer to say diurnal to nocturnal, and from mutable to cardinal, and from air to water. It's just like a totally different world, right? Well, for some, because Cancer is the moon's realm, there is a connection. Anyway, the moon is receiving Cancer. For some astrologers, Gemini is one of the worst places the moon can be. She's not said to be in fall or in exile in that sign. However, it's the 12th from Cancer, so she's in a place where her home world, Cancer, cannot see. Right? Many ways to pet the cosmic cat, many of them rude. Okay. So anyway, I was born from a modern point of view, especially if we limit our criteria to only the visible planets. The moon has finished her translations through the sign of Gemini as soon as she sextiled Jupiter. And if I go back a day before my birth, we would see that moon. Let's go back a couple of days. And I really encourage you to do this without pushing the buttons and whatnot, or even going through the ephemeris, at least at first. Moon, when she came into Gemini, she would not aspect Mars, because Gemini and Cancer are neighboring signs blind to one another. She would sextile Saturn. She would then trine Mercury. She would then, and you know what? Well, yeah, let me leave it there. She would then square Venus. She would then aspect Jupiter. So kind of going back to what happened a couple days before you, or the day before you, or whatever it may be, and looking at whose light moon carried to whom, right? And some will say after she makes her last aspect, so that would have been, if we look at only the visible planets, moon sextile Jupiter before I was born, then moon drops the light and goes void, of course. Now, some people say in natal charts, when the moon is void, this means that you're going to find your calling late in life. You're kind of stumbling through life. There's a lyric I wrote, which is, if I throw enough darts, and I'm bound to hit the bullseye, right? And it has, I think it's explained my go in many regards. And I did find my calling. I didn't find astrology until 2012. just after I had turned, or around before turning 37 years old. And then got straight to work. I had a conversation with Jupiter in the jungles of Peru, and he sent me to it. All right. Tale for another time. And I love it. Right. Well, let me show an example of a chart here. I got to open them up. I went to the movies yesterday, went and saw Dune, did the matinee scene, which was awesome. And I saw for the second time in recent days a poster for the Bob Marley movie. You know, Bob Marley was very important to me when I was young. So let me show you Marley's nativity. And here we see the moon at 27 Scorpio. Right, by the way, I use a lot of whole sign cosmology. I think, yeah, let's leave this in a whole sign framework, because we're talking about this modern view of void of course moon, where these are rigid walls between the signs, okay? So Marley was born with moon sextile Jupiter. I want to even just like tune into how I first sit with a chart. Well, I usually first sit with a chart, I just like let it speak to me, but then I'll go to the ascendant. For me, what's rising when you rose is rising within you. It is the most important thing of your nativity. And I've come in my astrological study after some time to very much approach that when Sagittarius is rising, then Jupiter is the steersman of this soul. It's a term that was used back in the day where the ascendant was called the rudder. The ascendant-descendant axis, it literally rudders across the cardinal directions every day, going north to the Tropic of Cancer and south to the Tropic of Capricorn. The tropical zodiac is very astronomical, okay? And that when Sagittarius is the rudder, then Jupiter is the steersman. And so when I see that, I was like, oh, this person's career is going to be so clearly tied to their path as a soul, like how they're here to grow, which is what I see in the first. Though there is, interestingly, an inconjunct between Mercury, who's said to rule Virgo, and Jupiter, who's said to rule Sagittarius. So me, my first house, my ascendant Jupiter, and the governor of my career, Mercury, the lord of the 10th, are inconjunct. Though we might show them trine on the aspect grid. Look at this, Mercury within 5 degrees, separating though from a trine with Jupiter. But if I'm using rigid walls between the signs, then Virgo and Aquarius are just inconjunct. They are quincunx. Aquarius being the neighbor of the sign that is the pair, Pisces, with Virgo. And in this case, this will be particularly important and interesting. Why? Because Jupiter resides in Mercury's sign. Sorry to get so loud about that, but this is an important truth. And I work with astrology this way. I've really kind of tuned into the traditional view, but then I add all sorts of modern tools and techniques and hopefully kind of heart. Jupiter is said to be in exile in the sign of Virgo. So, as I was saying before, and here's a good example, Venus is said to be in exile in Aries. She's opposite the world from her place in Libra, like literally, right? Here's Earth in the middle of the chart. Venus is on the other side of the world from her Libra domain. Do you think Bob Marley had weak Aries? I'm sorry. Do you think Bob Marley had weak Venus? And by the way, the answer to both of those is no. But the Aries or the Mars probably comes from an exalted Mars in the sign of Capricorn. Well, Venus is not exalted. Venus is in so-called exile. As, by the way, is Saturn. As, by the way, is Jupiter. The moon opposite the sign Taurus of her exaltation is said to be in fall. Now, Bob Marley did die young. There was also an assassination attempt some years before that, right? But let's get back to this question. Did Bob Marley have a weak Venus? Now, when I ask that question, I might say, well, Venus governs the 6th, and he did fall ill, and he died of cancer. I might say, well, Venus governs the 11th, and his band did break up, like Bunny and Peter left and these kinds of things. There's other ways to go about that question with Bob, but if I just say Venus is Venus, and she represents the arts and music, and the singing voice at least, and if she represents love and passion and relationship, probably especially when she's in the fifth, at least here in the fifth whole sign, did Bob Marley have a weak Venus? And we use some kind of explicative and we say no, right? Because Bob Marley, as far as my heart's concerned, one of the most beautiful singers of all time. But what did he sing about? Now, some of you will attribute this to the Aquarius sun, Aquarius Mercury, and I don't think you should not. He sang about revolution. Why was he assassinated, or why did they attempt to assassinate him? Because he was singing about truth and freedom and finding ways to help this happen in his homeland of Jamaica, and even in the global hearts of those who were awake enough to listen. He sang of emancipation and much, much more. And let's at least honor that Bob Marley's relationship thing was weird, at least from the kind of, Christian or matrimonial worldview. He was married to Rita. They had 5 children, but he also had 7 children with 7 different women. And his children in his home with Rita had a really hard time with that. Rita has said she did not, that she was kind of the backstage guardian, and she'd only let the pretty ones in. And I don't know her, and it's why looking at celebrity charts is really stupid and can get us into a lot of trouble. And I'd rather speak with people real time live about their chart and try to learn something about me by looking at mine. Okay. Does Bob Marley have a weak Venus? No, but she was certainly counterculture, right? And Bob Marley, Jupiter in Virgo, and didn't he have a rather counterculture religion? What is this whole Rastafarian thing? And a counterculture social expression. Maybe some of you studied Marley in his life, and you're like, yes, right? Is there a counterculture expression of a Scorpio moon? Is there a counter, right, who might invoke the passions of me, not just be concerned about the feelings of the other, and the nurturing mommy kind of Cancer reality for moon? Or the kind of stable Taurus exaltation for the moon versus kind of the chaotic realm that Scorpio is, the art of the heart. What about the other kind of social planet of Saturn and Cancer, right? We could go on and on and on. I think let's not be there right now. I would just say also that in some traditional point of view, Jupiter represents the father, and the father wasn't around for Bob Marley. Is that father in exile? Probably. But is Bob Marley in exile too? Well, I think in many ways. But I just want to say very clearly, planets in so-called detriment or fall does not make them weak. As I said before, Galileo Galilei, Mercury in Pisces, Isaac Newton, Mercury in Sagittarius, Bob Marley, Venus in Aries, Muhammad Ali, the greatest fighter of all time, Mars in Taurus. But Muhammad Ali's great fight was choosing to not go to Vietnam, though it meant jail time, fines, and not being allowed to fight in the 3 years of his prime. That was his great fight, counterculture, right? So I hope that you'll add that to your experience or expression or study of essential dignities. Bob Marley quite low on the essential dignity medieval scorecard, but pretty big for Mars and Mercury. Okay, anyway. So from a modern point of view, Bob Marley was born with a void of course moon. Now, Bob Marley found his calling quite young. He moved from the country in St. Anne's to Kingston, kind of got involved with the whole rude boy thing and realized that like music was going to be his way. Almost gave up at one point, but he started the Wailers, or the band that became the Wailers, when he was pretty young, and it had fire behind it and it got going, So, is this moon void? Well, does every void moon mean we're going to find our career late in life, or is it silly to apply any generalization to any astrological thing? Probably the latter is true. And from a classical point of view, this moon isn't void anyway. Because oddly enough, where from the classical point of view, where we have a lot of whole sign framework, right? Like in Hellenistic astrology, in most Indian practitioners, what we call Jyotisha or Vedic astrology these days, most of them use whole sign framework. I don't know what they're doing about translation, so I shouldn't even step into that realm I know nothing really about. But interestingly, in Hellenistic astrology, where typically you see more of a rigid wall between signs, not some like soft cusp, that it's more this turning versus a smooth dial. In their translation of light criterion, it is much softer because there's two general things that I've heard expressed. The moon does not go void because she's made her last aspect in a sign. She only goes void when she's made her last aspect either for 13 degrees of travel. Where does that come from? That comes from moon's average travel during the course of one Earth day, which is 13 1/3 degrees through the zodiac, which is, by the way, why there are many lunar mansion traditions like the nakshatras that have divisions of the heavens into 13 1/3 degree slices. That's the average daily travel for the moon. One night with Purima, the next with Spica. Okay. So if we allow for 13 degrees of travel, this moon, who last aspected this retrograde Virgo Jupiter, which, by the way, I'll call in one regards a strange way of seeking spirituality as part of my job, part of Bob Marley's job. And she's therefore carrying that Mercury to whom? Sorry, that Jupiter to Mercury. Because moon shortly after Marley's birth, I'm going to make sure I have some of these charts saved that I want to work with. Cool, I don't need to work with mine anymore. Well, maybe I do. We don't need this weekly Wednesday thing anymore. Let's just do all that in case. All right, let's go a day after Marley's birth, and I'm just going to look at when moon from Sagittarius sextiled Mercury. So Marley's born February 6, 1945, 2:30 a.m. Within 9 hours, the moon traveled into Sagittarius and perfected her sextile with Mercury. Now, does it make sense that Marley was born with the moon translating Jupiter to Mercury? Absolutely. He sang about spirituality and sacred plants. And her rituals got to have kaya now, etc., So perhaps Marley was not born with the void of course moon. If we let the moon travel 13 degrees, she only had to move less than 5 to find her next astrological aspect. And then amazingly, after this time, and by the way, we could speak about like progressed translation of light. Moon would then translate Mercury to whom? To Venus. Even though before moon did perfect this trine from Sagittarius to Aries Venus, Venus had already squared Saturn. And so Saturn's now in an earlier degree before the moon can catch up, but Sagittarius can't see Cancer. So this is a moon translating Jupiter to Mercury to Venus. Or if we rewind time, moon sextile Mars. So while mom's in labor with baby Bob Marley, from Scorpio, moon sextiles Mars, then translates that light, which has generosity, because Scorpio is said to be Mars's sign, and especially with Mars in an exalted state. She then carries that to Jupiter, which probably helps Jupiter out. And I think most interestingly, then, after Moon sextile Jupiter, if we let ourselves not use cusps as rigid walls, but let the Moon travel 13 degrees, Moon will carry Jupiter to Mercury, which from an old school point of view will be very helpful for Jupiter because he resides in Mercury's sign, and Jupiter in general is not really designed to know how to Virgo because his specialty is Pisces. So it's very helpful when planets can see their teachers. Let me give you another example of this, and I'm going to go into one final thing and a personal experience of it. We'll do a couple live chart examples if there are courageous souls, and then we'll get to our community discussion. Sorry it's taken so long to get there, but we are talking about void, of course, Moon, and so we're only honoring the essence. I was hoping to talk about collection of light today, which is a slower moving planet, still carrying the energy of the conversation she engaged with when a faster moving planet aspected her, and then offering that to the next fastest moving planet that aspects her. But that's as much as I have to say about it today. Maybe we'll see it pop up in a chart example. Amelia Earhart, who, was lost. In that sense, went very void, didn't she? I mean, Amelia Earhart, legend, off to circumnavigate the globe on a solo flight. Well, she had a navigator with her, right? She was just about done jumping from one place to the next to refuel and the like, and she was from Papua New Guinea, north of Australia, right? And just got lost. She was just about to turn 40 years old, and they didn't pronounce her dead for a couple of years later. Where did she go? What happened? We can assume that she crashed into the ocean, but maybe she's the empress of another dimension, kind of Bermuda triangled some way into something cooler than this. I don't know, maybe both. Anyway, she was not born with the moon void. She was born at night, making the moon her sect light. The moon is applying to Pluto. And if we honor translations with the invisibles, she interestingly is translating this Mars-Jupiter scene, right? She translated Mars to Jupiter from Gemini squares, and then is bringing Jupiter adventure and the like, but also, an exile. That can be faraway lands to Pluto, and we're looking at some danger there, right? But let's take this to the old school point of view. So we'll limit this thing at Saturn. And now we see Moon translating Jupiter, which was her last aspect, Gemini Moon square Jupiter. Where is she carrying the light of Jupiter to? All right, I'm going to check in with the chat. I would love for some of you to answer this, please. And Hannah, it's cool to see what you said, that your moon is not void from a traditional point of view, from that 13-degree rule. That's the same with me. And I think I will share my chart once finally. Cheryl, you got it. A lot of people went for the lower hanging fruit, which is really easy in this chart because moon is just right there with Venus. Right? So it's like, she's about to conjoin Venus. But look at this little guy. Mercury throws a ray in between. Right? So Mercury's ray is at 1238. And so Moon will sextile Mercury before Moon conjoins Saturn. So Moon comes into Gemini. Let's just go back before Amelia Earhart. Moon comes into Gemini. And what's the first thing on her books? She will sextile the sun. Right? Now she's carrying the Leo light of the sun, which is probably a great thing to do. Who is she bringing it to? Well, she's going to square Mars. But perhaps that moon square Mars is a little bit easier than otherwise it would have been. There's a couple reasons for that. One, Moon is overcoming Mars. Gemini rises before Virgo does. Another reason for that is it's nighttime, if you know your rules. But another reason for that is maybe Mars is bona fide because he's applying to Jupiter, and now Moon is translating Mars to Jupiter to kind of accelerate that. But an application to Jupiter when in the sign of Virgo might not be as beneficial if Jupiter was in other signs, where he's not said to be in exile. All right. Anyway, Moon sextile Sun, so Moon is carrying that energy to her square with Mars. She then, very shortly after she squares Mars, squares Jupiter, right? So 7:50 p.m. and then 8:14 p.m. Now Moon squares Jupiter because they're so close. And conveniently for her, and I think it shows up. And by the way, I had a dream about Amelia Earhart last night, and I looked her up, and it's like, oh, what a great chart example. Moon now sextile Mercury. And then she would carry Mercury to Venus, and then from a modern point of view, go void, right? And it'd be interesting to look at like Moon's translations and voidness in the progress chart, for example, on that day she disappeared. But dig this, right? Where is Jupiter? Like Marley in Virgo. Now, unlike Bob Marley, Jupiter is not the steersman of her chart. She's born with Taurus rising. So Venus in Gemini, right? And she did so much for like the advancement of feminine truth through travel, interestingly, right? We have Mercury and Venus connected, which we want. We have Moon and Mercury connected, which we want, because Moon and Venus reside in Mercury's realm. So if they're going to study Gemini, it's really nice to have these connections to their teacher, especially when we look at things like its Moon applying to Mercury and then translating Mercury to Venus, right? Mercury applying to Venus. That one doesn't show up here. I guess the criterium's a little tight. They're just beyond 5 degrees. Must be the computer setting. I definitely see this as a sextile, especially because it will perfect Mercury sextile Venus while in these signs of Leo and Gemini, respectively. Virgo is Mercury's other world. Yes? So Mars and Jupiter reside there. They would like, from my point of view, and because I've been taught this, to have an aspect with Mercury. And they don't, they're inconjunct. So it's very convenient, especially for Jupiter, that Moon at the time of Amelia Earhart's birth is translating Jupiter to Mercury. Now, look, if we just use general planetary significations, the Jupiter Mars looks like dangerous adventure, right? I mean, that's one expression. Mercury, generally speaking, of travel. And look at kind of like the courageous solo travel of Leo and the fame and whatnot. That's just part of her trip, yeah? Helpful for Mercury to be cohabiting with the sun in that regard. Moon is connecting Jupiter to Mercury. And she flew solo around the world and such, and was the first woman to, cross the Atlantic and all these other amazing things. It's awesome. We bring these other planets in, which, we didn't know in 1897. We knew about Uranus and we knew about Neptune, but we didn't know about Pluto. Now Moon is translating Jupiter to Mercury, but then Mercury to Pluto. And that kind of happened to her, didn't it? Okay, let me go back to another chart example we were just looking at. Okay, there's two more things I want to do, actually. I was going to show, let me show mine. So, you got to also honor that other planets move, right? So I'm not sure when I look at this chart, I have a hunch, but is Moon void? Okay, so from this modern point of view, yes, because she's made her last aspect from this sign, and that was the sextile with Jupiter. But from an old school point of view, if we let her go 13 degrees, then no, she's about to conjoin Mars. Some might not want that, especially for an out of bounds Mars in fall. Some might think it's cool. But doesn't she actually, before she conjoins Mars, Moon applying to conjoin Mars 6 3/4 degree apart, doesn't she first trine the sun? because with the sun in the first degree of Scorpio, the sun's ready to receive that trine ray from moon before she conjoins Mars, but not so fast because sun is faster than Mars. So we might be like rooting for, like horses on the racetrack, for the moon to catch up with sun before she conjoins Mars, and we just have to move forward through time. And so grateful for these softwares that allow us to do so today. Let's look at moon into Cancer, and look at where the sun is now, 123, and Mars at 140. It's like, come on, moon, get there. Let me do moon trine sun. Sometimes when they're this close, it will jump to the next one. No, there we go. And look at that. Moon does actually trine the sun before she conjoins Mars. It's kind of happening at the same time because I have sun and Mars so close to trine in my nativity. But this is kind of good news, right? Because sun lives in Mars's realm, and now the moon gets to connect them. I mean, they're already applying to trine anyway. Okay, cool. Let's do this weekly Wednesday. So the moon, from a modern point of view, void of course, she's made her last Ptolemaic aspect to any planet, especially the visible planets by this time. But if we loosen it up a little bit and let her move 13 degrees, who is she moving to next? And let me ask you out there, right? Because I really want you to like train yourself this way. Let me go. I'm just going to display the old school planets here. Who will moon next aspect after this moment that is charted on your screen? And by the way, feel free to just answer and be wrong. It's cool. We're learning together. That's the point of this. Hannah says the sun. Maybe Hannah, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Sun, we see some Mercury. Yeah, so Mercury is separating from the sun, right? And so because the Mercury-Sun conjunction had already happened, and so, yeah, like the only question here is, before the moon gets far enough into Scorpio where she's going next to trine the sun, will the sun have already passed Saturn? And this will give us a collection of light example. Or even, will sun and Saturn have moved far enough that moon will first square Mars? Well, Mars moves faster than Saturn, but sun moves much faster than Saturn, even though this is when Saturn's traveling most quickly. And so the answer here is going to be Saturn, not the sun. But this is interesting too. We see Malvina say, oh, maybe it's Jupiter, right? Because while Libra and Jupiter in Taurus, Libra and Taurus are in conjunct, Scorpio is not in conjunct Jupiter. So let's just see. Let's go, just go ahead by a day and rewind time. And now we got a transit chart to play with. And let's go moon, trine, Saturn. Right, and here's the trip. Moon's at 9:54 Scorpio when perfecting the trine with Saturn. Now here's an interesting example of collection of light. When sun conjoined Saturn, and I speak the name of the fast moving planet first, Saturn collected the sun's light, and now he's holding the sun, and the moon gets the sun from Saturn. And then she's just going to shortly after this translate Saturn to the sun, and then she'll oppose Jupiter. She'll translate the sun trine to Jupiter and Taurus, which is beneficial because they live in Pisces. And then she'll take Jupiter's light and she'll bring it to Mercury. Maybe she might square Mars before she trines Mercury. So do this on tons of charts. For people, hopefully you've been checking with your chart along the way and your nativity, whose light is moon translating to whom? Which planet did she aspect before your birth, and which planet will she aspect next? I start here with Ptolemaic aspects and with the visible planets. I like to go old school with it. Just to finish here, moon does indeed trine Mercury before she squares Mars, and then she finishes with a square to Venus. And then from a modern point of view, she will go void, moon square Venus. here. But let's just look at 13 degrees of travel. Well, that just brings her to the Sagittarius cusp, and she's not going to meet anyone then. But that brings us to another criterion, and it's going to bring me to kind of a heavy story, and then we'll do maybe 2 live chart examples, then we'll go to our community discussion, okay? All right, I got to prepare myself for this one. So I mentioned before that there's this other criterion of moon gets to travel 13 degrees because that's the average daily travel of the moon. It's really 13 1/3 degrees, but that the moon gets to go 13 degrees even across sign cusps before she drops the light of the previous aspect she made. There is another rule, which isn't 13 degrees at all, but 30. Because of course, that's the distance of a sign. Now this is older Hellenistic stuff. And by the way, I learned about this from Dmitri George in Ancient Astrology in Theory and Practice, a Manual of Traditional Techniques, Volume 1, which along with Volume 2, I find to be traditional astrology student essentials. 30 degrees. Now it is pretty rare for the moon to travel 30 degrees without making a Ptolemaic aspect to a visible planet, or the sun, if you prefer to separate sun from visible planet, right? It is very rare. Oddly for me, I had an experience of one of these rare 30-degree void moons shortly after I learned about this from Demetra, and oh my God, did I have an experience. And it's kind of heavy to talk about, but I'm going to go there. Anna's son, so my partner Scorpiana, it's an amazing son, Koa, who's now 8 years old and fortunately still with us because I'm going to rewind a few years until a time when it seemed like he could die. He was in the hospital. Nobody knew what was wrong with him. So let me first cast the chart and I'll get it on the screen. And I'm not going to show Koa's chart, by the way. He's 8 years old. I can't even have his consent to share a chart as far as I'm concerned at this point. But I'm going to go to August of 2020, when in the midst of all the lockdowns and whatnot, which means I wasn't allowed to see him in the hospital. Koa on a short trip that we had to see an old bandmate of mine who was visiting the Bay. We drove up and he had stomach issues. And he was really complaining of stomach issues. And got worse the next day. He wasn't eating. Anna was terrified. And I think it was the next day he went to the hospital. And they were like, yeah, this is scary, but we don't know what it is. And just keep an eye on him. And they released him. Well, he was released and he went to stay with his dad. So we weren't able to keep an eye on him. He came back here a few days later. And he was still in a bad place, or he kind of had recovered, but then it got bad again. And it was real bad. And, you know, typically speaking, moms are going to do less of the you can make it through this thing and let's go get this checked out thing. I don't mean to be sexist or whatever when I say that, but it was the case around here. And so we went back to the hospital. And by the way, at the time, Koa was in a Mars annual profection. So was his mom. So just add that for those of you who study that technique and speak that language. And he went to the hospital and with stomach pain, and they had no idea what it was. And I accurately, actually, because Anna, of course, was freaking out, she brought him in. His dad came in to kind of take a shift. I took Anna out to get some food. And she was most freaked out because they had no idea what it is, right? So, of course, that's difficult before diagnosis, right? And her son was sick, and I accurately predicted, because I had just learned about this old school voided course criteria, that until Moon made her next aspect, we wouldn't know. Soon as Moon made the next aspect, which was a sextile to Mars, she got the phone call. Now, it's still, they had no idea. And in this sense, it's interesting that he went into the hospital with this moon, like what I'll call like super void, like old school void, 30 degrees travel void. Let me put the chart on the screen. All right. I mean, interesting. It was kind of an interesting time to choose, this 12 p.m. I can't say exactly what his experience was here, but there's a term that you'll find if you study traditional astrology, which is, this is called the moon, not only in so-called exile, right? Because she's far from home in Cancer. And is it good news that she's hanging out with the teacher of the Capricorn reality? I mean, I lean towards yes, but this is a time when the moon is said to be besieged by the malefics. And the reason why is she is between Saturn's body and the ray of Mars, whose square ray is cast in this case to 2715 Capricorn. The moon's right in between, kind of like a rock and a hard ray. Okay. So, but why I wanted to show this example is, watch this. Moon squares Mars. It is the last Ptolemaic aspect she makes from the sign of Capricorn. Right? And then from a modern point of view, she goes void, of course, but only for a little bit, right? This is 12:30 p.m. And then moon, it releases her void. Most would suggest as soon as she ingresses to the next sign, which is, of course, Aquarius. Now, some say not until she makes the next aspect, and that would actually correspond in this case to this 30-degree idea of the moon can travel 30 degrees between aspects to visible planets without being considered void. Okay, well, who does she next aspect? So everyone play that, please. Let me check in with chat. Looking at this chart at this moment, it's 5:37 p.m., August 29, 2020, on Saturn's day. What is the next aspect on the moon's schedule? If you're considering only Ptolemaic aspects, conjunctions, sextiles, squares, trines, and oppositions. So Cheryl says Sun, and no, right? Because Aquarius and Virgo are inconjunct. But you're absolutely right to look for the planet in the lowest degree, right? Like that's that's my approach, right? So here's moon at 0, which by the way is not a number, it doesn't exist. But anyway, in the first minute of tropical Aquarius, so who's in the lowest degree? And the answer is Sun. But then we go, oh, wait a second. Aquarius and Virgo are inconjunct, they're quincunx, right? So same with another answer came in here, Venus. No, because Aquarius and Cancer are inconjunct, right? And then you're like, wait a second. But Aquarius and Capricorn are inconjunct, so she doesn't see that Jupiter over there. Aquarius and Virgo inconjunct, so she doesn't see that Mercury over there. And so one of you got this right. Mars, moon is going to go all the way 27 degrees before she next aspects the planet. And check this out, and this is why I wanted to mention that Koa at the time was in a Mars profection, and so was Mom. Moon's previous aspect is moon square Mars, and then she will translate the light of Mars to Mars. What? Like what? Like what? And that shit sounds dangerous and terrifying and crazy. And by the way, here in the Bay where we live, you'll notice that when moon squared Mars, Scorpio was rising. As this might be too TMI, but I think I'm okay. As Scorpio was rising when Koa was born, and he was in his 6th house annual profection, a year of health and illness. Amplified, and so he was in a Mars year, and Mars was traveling through the whole sign 6th of his nativity, which is the sign of Aries, okay? And the moon squared Mars, and we have no idea what's going on with him. This is August 29th, and he goes back to the hospital on August 31st, okay? And I think it was maybe 1 p.m. or something like that. And they have no idea what's going on with him. And I'm counseling on, this is maybe now 4 p.m. And we're talking astrology as we do. I'm very fortunate to have an astrologically inclined and educated partner in community. And I was like, hey, I just read about this thing from Demetra George. I don't think we're going to get results until Moon sextiles Mars. And literally here it's like 9:56 p.m. She's totally freaking out. I'm freaking out. We're freaking out. Moon sextiles Mars, the phone rings. Sadly, the phone rang and we're going to have to submit him to the ICU where he spent weeks and had kidney problems and all sorts of things. And now he's cool again, but he lost a lot of weight. And the guy is just awesome. And I can't believe I made it through that without just bawling, because it was one of the most confusing and hardest times of my life. And I can't even imagine what it was for his mom. Maybe I will once our daughter comes in June. Okay. All right, y'all. So we're taking forever here. I'm so sorry, forever. I did notice that a solar return being put their birth info into chat a little bit ago. So Stephen, this is you. Please write in a chat if you are willing to come on here live with your mic and camera shared and to look at this case for you and your nativity and talk about translations and whatnot. If you don't want to do that here live, which by the way, I'll just remind you is being broadcast to YouTube and is being recorded. I see that you're willing to join live. Just know that those are the other conditions. We can wait until we do the community discussion where we'll look at a bunch of charts together, which won't be recorded or broadcast or anything like that. But I see you're down. Okay, right on, Stephen. Please put your birth info back into the chat, because where you put it, like there's a lot of things going down between then and now. There's a bunch of intense thanks for sharing. Appreciate all this beautiful. Well, thank you so much, friends. It's really nice to have you here. I can't believe on such short notice. Like I sent the email yesterday, 200 people registered for this thing, and we've had, I think, 90 here at one point. We're down a little bit now because I've been talking too long, as I want to do. Sometimes I don't want to do, but it does me. Anyway, I really want to teach these things thoroughly. So hopefully that at least got across. Stephen, I'm just going to put whatever your last name is. I'm going to put Stephen the Jupiterian. That's how I know you. Jupiterian. And we have 3-2. Happy birthday, 1970. Manhasset. I have a good astrologer friend from there. Long Island at 2:09 a.m. Nighttime is the right time. Diane, happy birthday to you as well. I see your stuff there. And yeah, I think it would be fun to do 2 birthday chart examples here. Especially Diane, because if I remember right, you were asking about the void of course moon in your chart. Stephen, I did something wrong here. Yeah, somehow I got the time wrong. Hold on a second. So I saw a Capricorn moon. So 2:09 a.m. Okay, Sagittarius on the rise, Sagittarius moon. Let me do all the promotions and stuff. Buttons to get you promoted here. So we make you a panelist. You have to say yes to that. Looks like you did. And now that you're a panelist, we make you a co-host. And Stephen, this should allow you to share your camera and your mic, the buttons in the lower left, right? Happy birthday to you.
Thank you, Bert.
That's a great place to go for your birthday. I love that little zone up above Golden Gate. It's amazing that it's sunny there right now, because it looks cloudy when I look out my window, but I guess you got some birthday magic going. Good for you. Okay, thanks again for your willingness to share your chart here. I think that's great. And here we have that out of bounds moon. So I appreciate you asking that question as well. Look at how far out of bounds your moon is. Okay, she is way south of the Tropic of Capricorn. The sun could never even think or dream about going to this place that your moon is exploring. And what a better sign for deep exploration than Sagittarius. Maybe kind of dangerous exploration, that, because moon is not only square Pluto, and in a sense being overcome by Pluto if we honor Pluto in some of the ancient directions. But she's also has just recently trined Mars. And so literally from that modern point of view, I'm going to just play a game. I don't want to talk so much. Well, the parallax moon honors where the moon is in the local sky surface orientation, what we call topocentric versus geocentric. We actually, in astrology, we measure planetary placement not from the surface of the earth where we live, breathe, and witness the heavenly happenings, but rather from the center of the earth where we are all one. And beautifully, we are measuring, therefore, our experience of Earth's experience of the heavens. And so I tend towards the geocentric moon, but I just wanted to see if your parallax or topocentric moon was at a degree that was still earlier than Mars, and I should have known better. She wasn't. So let's just go back here to geocentric anyway. So from this modern point of view, from like what, just minutes before your birth, the moon is now void, right? She's out of bounds, she's void. So let's just check in, Stephen, share as much as you want. Remember, you are on the record here. We're not going to make you put your right hand on some Bible or anything. But do you feel void? How about that thing from before, which what was true for me? Did you find your calling late in life, or are you still
I
looking?
did. Yes.
What
Yeah.
is it? When did
Yeah.
it come around for you?
Well, let's see. Oh gosh. Let's see. Straight out of high school, I was like, I was um into cooking at the time. So I went to culinary school for a while, and that didn't work out. And so yeah, and then when just was just like took every class I could, and then I was like, all right, well, I know I'm an eternal student. So I was going to I was taking classes when I could, working at a community college. And then in 1994 was when I finally decided to become a teacher. So
And
yeah.
you teach kids or
Yeah,
what grade?
elementary school. Yeah,
So all subjects then, elementary
or
school teacher.
elementary. Yeah.
In the
Oh,
system,
yes.
how are you with dealing with the system?
Uh, no. No, no more. I actually, uh, I recently decided to change my career
Oh, wow.
again.
Like how recently?
Within the past year and a half or so,
Wow. And so have you left teaching or you're preparing to?
I have left teaching. Yes,
Wow, man.
and
Right on. What's next for you?
well, I've become a certified tarot card reader.
Beautiful. You've
And
told me that before. And how's it going for you? Are you sitting with clients and doing your
I
thing?
have I've had a couple clients that I've done readings for.
Yeah, how's it going?
Really good, actually. I actually one of them is a friend of mine too, so we became friends. So she texts me all the time.
Yeah, right on. Well, so we'll see that in your nativity because part of the thing, of course, with Pisces energy will be merging through our compassion and empathy and mysticism, but then also making sure that we don't merge too much, right? So we don't have clients calling us at 3 a.m., but we are also present and there for them when things align and that, right? Anyway, I think that's awesome for you. What an amazing change. And by the way, I might sound here like I'm not interested in people teaching kids. I think it's wonderful and so important. I also think it's difficult for those mystically inclined, especially more and more in our day and age with how school wants teachers to teach or not teach and
Exactly.
whatnot.
I
Um,
completely agree. Actually, when I saw that way that education was going in a certain different direction, I was like, oh, no, no, this is not how I want to teach.
and I feel like your job should at least be weird, not like school teacher can't be, especially with the kids, right? But we don't have the freedom to be as weird as we'd like to be, maybe because of standardized testing, whatever. Anyway, why do I say that? I also feel like your teaching, your career should be very compassionate, oriented, empathic, mystical, and those things can certainly happen for teacher too. Gosh, we need more of those teachers. I'm very glad to know kids got to come through your classroom.
Well,
So let me just show where I say those things. And obviously, this isn't like a career vocation class. I'm interested in Pluto being the highest planet in your chart by far. He's right at the top of your chart, and he's very far north of the ecliptic, which makes him even higher. If I show you like an altitude list, for example, we're going to see Pluto way above the ground, 64 degrees above the ground, 90 is the top of the chart. He's like way higher than anybody else. That's the thing I'm interested in. You're born by night, so the moon is your second She's out of bounds at the galactic center, super crazy. I'm tempted to open up some astronomy to show you just how close the moon was to the galactic center, but for now, just take my word for it. And we need the North Node in Aries or Pisces for that to be true. Okay. Well, the sun is at the node, which means you're an eclipse baby, right? We have a lunar eclipse about a week before your birth and a solar eclipse about a week after, so that too. But we see the governor of the 10th whole sign, Virgo, is Mercury in Aquarius, which generally should be out of the box. He's applying to Mars. The moon has recently carried Mercury's light to Mars. But now from this modern image, just recently, like right before your birth, 2634, now 2636 went void, right?
mhm.
And then Libra for the midheaven sign, and not to know that, like Uranus kind of close and whatnot, but like Libra, I go look at Venus and she's exalted in the very compassionate Pisces. She's in the third, we want to communicate that compassion. She's in the fourth whole sign, it's connected to the ancient ones, the buried things, the foundations, right? She's in conjunct Mercury, interestingly, and there's a whole thing there. Because it's kind of like you get two careers or two different ways to do your thing in that, but I really love that it sounds like your kind of mysticism. And of course, like with the tarot, where we have deep tradition and whatnot, but it's so intuitive, right? It's
Yeah.
like, where the Mercury might enjoy the astrology charts, which I also know you're proficient with,
Mhm.
because it's the Aquarian kind of nature of the science and the like. But I think Venus would prefer the cards. Because, especially I bet you're one who's like, what do you see? Right?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So is the moon void? Well, it is, and just barely. Like, right? If we use this modern point of view, but let's not. Let's see who she will next aspect if we let her move 13 degrees or even 30. And I guess let's ask chat, maybe most interesting, Stephen, live chat. Who's the moon going to next aspect after the moment of your birth? And chat, feel free to ring in here if you'd like. Stephen, you got it? Or do you want me to just report?
I probably Pluto. Yeah.
Well, she has already squared
Oh,
Pluto.
oh, right. Oh, right. Then Uranus.
Yeah, I think before that. Well, so if we're using all the planets and planetoids and whatnot on the screen, she will square Chiron next. No,
Right.
she won't.
Trying. Maybe.
She might, but she might trine Saturn from Capricorn next, which is actually a really beautiful. Let's go look. I'm gonna go Moon trine Saturn. And by the way, if we go more traditional, we're not gonna look to the square with Chiron anyway. We're
Mhm.
looking at this Moon trine Saturn, which actually happens. I was wondering, but just before the the sextile to Jupiter. So, and there's like big generosity here because Saturn's dang near the degree where Moon is said to be exalted, which is 2 and change Taurus. And then, of course, Capricorn is said to be Saturn's sign, though it's not said to be Moon's, like, general way or whatever. So, in a sense, we could say that the Moon is carrying Mars to Saturn and over this cusp. And first of all, do we want that? Is your moon suddenly besieged by the malefics? Most, by the way, would say definitely no. because both of these are trines, and a trine is the Jupiterian aspect. Um, but let's see if this is happening, how this has happened, how it can. I mean, I think an important thing just happened for you. You made a really courageous separation,
Correct.
right?
I
I mean,
did.
you've been in this career forever. Took you a while to find it.
Mhm.
You at least get, a decent potential promise of tenure in the healthcare and all those things that we get more and more concerned about as we wrinkle. Um,
Mhm.
and you took this damn courageous leap, right? So look, Mars is in Aries, Mars is in Aries, Mars is in Aries, the moon is trine Mars. You know what I mean? Like you got it,
Yeah.
right? But there's something here where you kind of broke away from a structure. And that might be in the design of this coming Mars Saturn conjunction in Taurus after you're born, right? But Saturn in Taurus, like, it can be hard to make change. I mean, I can't do everything today, obviously. We want to get to another chart example and then finally get to our community discussion if anybody's left after I've babbled so long. But that you're born at a very important time of the Jupiter Saturn 20-year cycle where they're in opposition. It's a very important kind of social statement.
Mhm.
But I just love Moon carrying Mars to Saturn because in a way there can be like a courage to break away from something. And I might then also look at Mars ruling the IC and so the quadrant fourth, but also the fifth sign of passion, of
Mhm.
Saturn being Saturn, but also governing the second of your values, the third, at least whole sign where Mercury resides, so if you like your skills and siblings and something. And there's something about like Moon, I think, in this way, dreaming into, feeling into like kind of a new out of bounds framework that she's seeking to help Mars, maybe with your family at your back, maybe not, maybe driven by your passions, hopefully, to like separate from some kind of structure that feels like too fixed or the like. Do you feel me?
Yes. Yeah, actually, I think that's why I moved all the way across the country.
Get away from the family.
Away from the family. Yeah.
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 Yeah, it ain't easy being a mystic.
It
Um,
isn't.
All right, well, I want to ask so many questions and whatnot, but I think let's get on to our next birthday solar return chart candidate here so we can go to community discussion. I want to mention two things before I bring Diane up. First, thank you, Stephen.
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday to you. I hope you'll be able to come and hang out another hour or so in community discussion. I'd love to hear more. Thank you so much for that Aries Mars courage to share your chart on the screen. You're on the record. Yeah, and I hope we get to hang out under the stars sometime. I just get to
Awesome.
see you in the
That'd be
YouTube
great.
chat and things like this, and we're just
Mhm.
across the water. So let's meet up and look at stars. All right,
Perfect.
cool. Yeah, before I bring Diane on screen, I just want to put in chat, what is it? It's shadow play. Um, let's see if well, I'm not going to put that in the YouTube because it's not online. But everybody, shadow play, it's one word. If you go over to GeminiBrett.com and go to my astrology sessions page, which is GeminiBrett.com/sessions, you can use this shadow play discount code or coupon code when you check out for any offering I have. You can do it more than once, by the way, before April 8th, before the coming total solar eclipse. It's an 18% discount on anything I do. I mean, I would prefer to stimulate you an interest in having an eclipse reading. Where is this coming 20th degree of Aries total solar eclipse aligned to your nativity? Eclipse cycle reading. Where was it 18 years ago? Where will it be 18 years from now? Where are you in your personal eclipse family turnings? All right, but you can use it for anything you want. It's 18% off my sessions. I sent that out yesterday in email. Please be on my mailing list. You can do so at GeminiBrett.com so I can send you things like coupon codes sometimes. And a bunch of folks booked readings yesterday, and thanks for that. It helps out. We got a baby coming. I gotta be professional. The other thing I want to do, and I'm going to do this while I push a bunch of buttons here, is I had yesterday made a pretty link. Thank you so much to my beloved Scorpiana for showing me how to do this. And the link is geminibrett.com/class. Okay. And that link, as of right now, will take you to a registration page for the class you are already experiencing. But as soon as I push a few more buttons, where the heck is it? It will then take you to the webinar for next week's session like this on birthday class to be determined. Okay, so I found it. Let me just push a few buttons. Okay, so everyone, if you would right now while you're online and I bring our next birthday being onto the scene, if you are interested in doing something like this again next week, and again, I'm not sure which topic I'll teach, please go right now to geminibrett.com/class, CLASS. And by the way, Gemini Brett has Gemini T's, BRETT. If you go to geminibrett.com/class, you will be able to register for next week, Saturday, Saturn's Day, March 9th, 2024, the same time, 9 a.m. to like 11 a.m. Pacific time for a talk and a community discussion. I promise next week I will talk less and we'll get to the community discussion sooner. Okay. In the future, these things are going to have a monthly membership. And folks that want to support by my work will be in like kind of different levels, but like the main thing where you'll have access to these kind of informal teachings like this, community discussions, really wanting to get community discussions. I will start, for people who are interested in playing, start assigning little research topics where you can team up with groups of 2, 3, 5, something like that. Really get to bond with people in our journey together for search and quest through these starry mysteries. Shauna, that's sweet. Terry, I'm just noticing in chat you asked if I have a donation link. That's really sweet of you. Thank you. And then Shauna, also really sweet of you to track one down and share it in chat. I'm super appreciative of that. That's so nice of you. Not the best businessman over here. I'm an astrologer, y'all. Cheryl, you're asking if I'm going to do this through Patreon. Actually, Kajabi, which you know is where I host my School of Astrology courses, also offers a kind of membership group thing. We're going to try it there. So anyway, more of that to come. Anyway, yeah. So Shauna, thank you very much for sharing that donation link in my chat. There's donate buttons on like every page of geminibrett.com. You want to buy me a cup of tea? Please do. Again, super sweet of some of you to ask and answer and track that down. Thank you very much. It fuels the ship. Okay. All right. So we have one more example chart here to bring in. Diane, I have already promoted you to panelists. Hey, same disclaimer, right? This is like literally being broadcast live to YouTube and it will stay there. So make sure you want to share publicly and on the record, or whatever you share is aligned with those constraints or lack thereof. All right. And if you'd like, you should be set up now to share your camera and your mic. Hi, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
How fun that we have two birthday folks here. And one of them, Stephen the Jupiterian, born from this modern point of view, but not some of the old traditional criterion, with the void, of course, moon. Of course, this is not true for you, Diane.
Right.
So let's go instead to translation of light. Everyone, when you look at this chart, and I hope for when you look at every chart, you will ask this question: whose light is the moon carrying, and to whom is she carrying it, right? Who is she connecting? Diane, do you want to answer that for your chart?
Well, my first guess, Brett, would have been Jupiter, but then on Stephen's chart, you said that was, he with his Pluto, he already had a square there. But that's what I would have gone to was Jupiter.
Well, yeah, that's who she'll see next, right? So
Right.
who was she seeing last? And the answer is Mercury, right? So shortly before your
Okay.
birth, we had Moon square Mercury. Let's actually just go back in time and look at that chart when it happened. So I'm going to go ask Astro Gold to show me Moon square Mercury. I'm now actually limited only to the visible planets, and that's an okay way for us to start our quest. And I must have pushed bad buttons there. Dope. Okay, there we are. So it was March 2nd, 56 at 1:31 a.m. And your birth time is 5:50 a.m. Safe to assume your mom's in labor at this point, though I know some have very quick deliveries, bless them, right?
2 days, Brett. She went into labor on the
Holy
29th.
moly.
Yeah,
2 days. Are you the first?
I'm the only. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we can't blame her, right?
No.
After a 2-day labor, Anna went, is this TM? No, I think she's okay. Anna went 36 hours with Kova, and
Yeah.
so we're hoping with baby girl coming in June, it's a little bit of a quicker trip. So time will tell. Wow. So here are these last 4 hours of mom's labor. Moon comes into square Mercury, which, square is a square. It's a tense aspect.
Hmm.
I mean, it'd be interesting to even rewind time and see when Moon first came into Scorpio, what did she do? And the answer is she sextiled Mars. But I mean, gosh, if we go to like your nativity and we go back 2 days, then actually when mom's labor started, Moon was still in Libra. And in this case, she's not besieged by the malefics. She's what we call enclosed by the benefics. Because between Venus, who she is already opposed, and Jupiter, who she will next sextile, right? And then when she sextiles Jupiter from this modern point of view, she goes void, which was maybe mom's experience there, and that she would be void until she enters Scorpio. Now, soon after she does, which, that's the tradition says Moon is in fall in that sign, and mom's just hoping you'll fall out. Anyway, Moon comes into Scorpio and she sextiles Mars. So the beautiful thing there is hopefully this charged mom up and you with kind of the courage to fight this good fight. I mean, like a birth is such a Mars thing; it's such a separation, right? And then in this case, after Moon sextiles Mars, let's just push the magic buttons here. Moon sextile Mars. And I love kind of going back before birth like this and looking at, what had happened like leading into me, especially when there's such an epic birth experience like this. So Moon sextiles Mars, and now it looks like maybe her next aspect would be to Saturn because Saturn's in such low degrees. But we remember that Scorpio and Sagittarius are said to be in conjunct.
Right.
So Moon doesn't even see Saturn. It might be fortunate, right? So who is she going to aspect next? And the answer is the Sun.
Sun. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a sextile with Mars and a trine to the Sun. So at this point, mom's like, yeah, people have 10-hour labors. And, it's a thing, but she had signed up for a little bit more. You had signed up for a little bit more than all that. Let's go Moon, trine, Sun.
I am a Pisces. I didn't want to leave, apparently.
Right? I mean, the womb is such a
moon, it's like
you're like, I like this water world, right?
Exactly. I still like that water world.
Yeah, and that'll actually bring us to the square, which will be fun. But there is so we got a lot of labor has happened by now. Shadows are getting long. The sun is moving through the 8th. There might be some fear that this could be a death in childbirth or whatever. Do you know what I mean? And it's like this trine to the Pisces sun. It's like keep the faith, right? Like keep the light. Because I really love that aspect that happens before you. And then we get Moon square Mercury. And a fun one here is it really is the head versus the heart, right? The Aquarius air. I pushed the wrong button. Hold on. Moon square. There we go. So this is this 1:31 a.m., some 4 hours before your birth, to 36 hours of labor. And Moon has been moving through Scorpio here for a while, and now she comes in and squares Mercury. And there's that interesting image of you're like, I just rather stay in the womb. Like this was comfortable. This is the water, but we have to come and take a breath, you know? And with a kind of the Aquarian mind and the Scorpio heart, there really is that like head versus the heart in that square, right? And I always say, like, you know, promote the headless heart. Just feel your feels. You don't need to narrate. You don't need to know why. Just cry and laugh and go insane and be a lunatic. It's okay. And I can get punished for this one. Also promote the heartless head. It's okay, especially when things are super title, to try to get above it all and have a look. Don't get stuck in that place, right? But if we can promote the headless heart and the heartless head, then we can bring those two powers together in the middle way, which meet here to express the ensouled voice, you know? Anyway, so this is the aspect before your birth. In the one to come, we see that Venus is in the next kind of lowest degree, but Scorpio and Aries, while they are connected through the energy of Mars, they are said to be blind to one another still. So the moon's next aspect to a visible planet won't be for a bit, and it's another square. And actually, even between this time, like when moon gets to like 20 here, right? Or here, she's pretty close to the midpoint of Mercury and Jupiter. Your moon is within 2 degrees of the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, shows the nerd dial. And right, so she's not only is she translating Mercury to Jupiter, and in a sense kind of accelerating the conversation that they have on the books, because Mercury's direct, Jupiter's retrograde. Mercury is applying to oppose Jupiter at the time of your nativity, and though they're still 7.5 degrees apart, it will happen. But because Moon squared Mercury and now she's set to square Jupiter, she's kind of accelerating that thing. A cool thing here, I'm very interested to see if Venus perfects her trine to Jupiter that's on your schedule before the moon squares Jupiter. I'm thinking no. Yeah, it's no. But in a sense, an interesting thing there. So this is called collection of light. Once moon squares Jupiter, Jupiter's kind of holding the moon.
Okay.
And so when Venus gets to Jupiter with this trine, which happens at 9:41 p.m., the moon's got that story. Sorry, Jupiter has that story to tell Venus about the Scorpio moon. This is a really beautiful aspect after you, for your mother, who of course is experiencing that transit too. For anyone else who is in the room, just praying that this thing could happen safely and all that, right? It's like Venus trine Jupiter. It's kind of hard to get nicer than that in some perspectives, depending on signs, and there's a question mark there, whatever, do you know what I mean? But it's like, we did it, everything's okay. We kept the faith, we did all the things through this tidal space. Yeah, and so the thing I would encourage you to kind of hold on to is, like, even though a square is a square, and like, but you know, she's between a let's call it strange in a shiny place, right? It's a little easier than the rock and the hard place thing we were talking about before.
Right.
The moon's taking this Aquarius Mercury and bringing it to this Leo Jupiter. And my hope is, like, part of it will encourage, like, I'll just say, like, the sorceress, the witchy you, the Scorpio moon, to like let yourself be weird enough and really express that creatively without abandon. Do you identify as an artist, Diane? There's a lot of art in your chart from my point of view.
Actually, Brad, you and I had talked once before. I had talked with you about astrocartography, moving out to the West Coast. We'd
Right.
come up with Ashland, Oregon, and I talked to you about art therapy.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad to hear you bring that up again.
Yeah, anytime I look at your chart, I'll ask you. Because part of my
Okay.
client confidentially is I like rub the record when the session
No,
closes.
no, sure. And I
Right.
completely understand that, but this is great that you brought that up because you brought it up this time, not me. And I love
Oh,
that.
oh, got it
I
right
love
on.
that.
Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. So
Um,
thank you.
cool. Yeah, I mean some of that too, and this is like, reflections of fifth harmonic aspects in your chart, which can be very artistic and they're very strong for you. So like different story, different time. Let's tune into your fifth harmonic sometimes. I would
Yeah,
really encourage you to because yeah, there's strong art chart. And then I love that it's like a Scorpio moon. Like let's feel it bringing Mercury in Aquarius, right? Like so there can be like strange skill and technique in that. In an otherworldly view, I like especially love Mercury in the 12th side in the quadrant chart to this Jupiter. And especially in therapy, it's super cool, right? With Jupiter ruling the midheaven sign and being in the seventh.
hmm,
I mean, he's with Pluto, but it's kind of like bringing like confident spirituality about, all of our fears and all of our light and those kinds of things. And Leo is just such a creative sign in itself. And doing that like with other people, like assisting people through it, like makes a ton of sense. And yeah, I like so Venus and Aries, you like Bob Marley, right? There's something also about going a little counterculture with it.
hmm.
Thank you so much for choosing to share your chart and giving us another example to look at there. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, my pleasure. All right, so we still have on the Zoom side here 44 folks. I don't know if all of you want to keep this going. I'm going to open now a Zoom meeting. So let me get this link into chat. I gotta find out how to do that, friends. It's just gonna take a second. I would love to review comments and whatnot, but you know what? We're gonna go hang out together, and I'd rather hear it from the centaur's mouth. So let me just go over to this Zoom meeting I had set up. Da-da-da-da. You know what? I need to schedule a new one because we're so far behind the time I thought we would be on. But again, we're talking void of course moon, so isn't it just right? And we will, by the way, take a break before we launch, but I want to make sure I open that room for everyone. Okay. So I'm just making a community discussion meeting right now. Probably should have stopped the YouTube thing, but I'll put this in the YouTube chat as well. I mean, I haven't even looked at it, but if anyone's watching over there live now, I will put this Zoom meeting into your chat as well, so you can come join us and open heads and hearts and share together. So everyone, I just put the link here in Zoom. I think that's the best I can do to get it to you. Let me go to the YouTube video, which is happening right. See if I can find this thing. Here it is. All right, I see that 21 are live here at YouTube. So let me get this. Some of you are in both places at once. Oh, Gemini. All right, so there's now a link in YouTube as well. Shauna, you wrote you're there already. That's cool to know that it can like already be opened up. I think as soon as I hit open, and I'm about to, friends, this webinar is going to close. So please make sure you hit the meeting link now. You've got, I see many of you disappearing. See you on the other room. Okay. Yeah, you're disappearing from here. Does everyone have the link? In 10, 9, 8, 7,